Logan, whenever. All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the October meeting of the Save Our Indian River Lagoon Citizens Oversight Committee. I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order, and let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Jackie, would you do the roll call, please?
Sure. Good morning.
Good morning.
Lorraine Koss. Here. Charles Venuto.
Here.
Vinnie Toronto.
Here.
Don Deese.
Here.
John Windsor.
Here.
Terry Casto is not here. Bobby Putnam.
Here.
Laura Lee Thompson is not here yet. Stephanie Ely.
Here.
Kimberly Newton is not here yet. Todd Swingle is not here yet. Kurt Smith.
Here.
Barbara Wall Scanlon. Here. Okay, and Eric is not going to be here today. We have a quorum.
All right. Thank you very much. Okay, the first thing is the approval of the agenda. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second? All right, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Other than it's a full agenda, which I love for an October. Let's go. Any public comment? All right, we'll go ahead and vote on the agenda. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, passes unanimously. The next thing will be the approval of the minutes. Anybody, is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the minutes from last month's meeting? All right, any public comment? Okay, we'll go ahead and vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, passes unanimously. Let's jump into the monthly progress report. Virginia, good morning.
Good morning. All right, leaky lateral repairs, 15 more were completed this month. One more quick connect, 6 more septic upgrades. The Mitco sewer line extension is finally 100% constructed, all the punch list items, but we had revisions to the as-built surveys, and we have to have finalized as-built surveys before we can ask DEP to let us connect people. So one more hurdle before we can connect people. Sykes Creek Zone T, that land acquisition is finally all cleared, so we can move forward with the next steps with getting to construction, which you'll talk about a whole lot more at the end of today's agenda. University of Central Florida completed 2-year monitoring at the Castaway Cove site down in Palm Bay. They found a density of 1,446 oysters per square meter. If you'll recall, our target in the plan is 100 oysters per square meter, so more than 14 times the target. Go oysters. Yeah. Derelict vessels, this is like, 1 step forward, 3 steps back or whatever. So the state contract is back in action for this fiscal year, and 1 vessel was removed, but Hurricane Helene graced us with 17 more derelict vessels, and Milton then added another 19 on top of that. So Matt Culver is working with the state on getting them to contact the owners as quickly as possible. The state, because it's an emergency, because it's a hurricane, they're giving everybody a few weeks to try to come rescue their vehicles, get with their boat insurance before they proceed with the legal steps that would allow us to have them declared derelict and remove them. We received 22 new funding applications, and Terry's gonna...
I have a brief update on that. We received 22 applications. 1 was withdrawn. 11 of those were stormwater, 6 were restoration, 2 wastewater treatment facility upgrades, 1 quick connect, and 1 aquatic vegetation harvesting for a total of $9.5 million. We're still reviewing those and prepping everything for the November meeting for that for you guys. So I'm planning hopefully to send the table out within the next week or 2, along with the project description and information, so you have plenty of time to review that before the November meeting.
Great, that's a good number.
Yeah. So the League of Cities met on October 14th, Monday, and they made their decision about renewals. And so they recommended that Laura Lee Thompson and Don Deese and Eric Manis all be reappointed. And we also asked right, so the board was going to hear the ordinance changes, have the public hearing on the ordinance changes to the structure of the COC, potentially adding the emeritus positions and swapping the lanes to create the Lagoon Commerce position. They were going to hear that during the meeting that got canceled because of the hurricane. So that is now rescheduled. The hearing was re-advertised for Tuesday. So Tuesday, under public hearings, they will have that decision, and then under new business, lower on the agenda, they will decide on their renewals and about the emeritus roles if those are approved. So I asked the COC to go ahead and make a recommendation for an emeritus if the board approves that change, and they selected Charlie Venuto.
Yay!
Yay. So Tuesday, I think you all know this, but the three people in county seats that will be up for renewal are Barbara Wall-Scanlon and Kimberly Newton and Kurt Smith. And then the other two folks who are interested in emeritus roles are Stephanie Ely and John Windsor. So we'll see how all that goes on Tuesday.
And Virginia, real quick, that was the League of Cities that approved.
Yes.
I think you said COC.
I'm
But,
sorry.
No,
Thank you for that
no,
correction.
you're good. I
League of
just
Cities.
wanted to make sure the League of Cities appoints one of the emeritus, and then the way we're looking would be the BOCC board
Yes,
would
the
appoint
other
the other
one.
one.
Yes.
Throwing in acronyms around early on a Friday. Let's go.
Okay. The 2025 plan update. We're busy writing and drafting and updating tables, and so that's staff's busy on top of hurricanes. South Central C, 15 more connections this month, so 108 out of 151. South Beaches A, septic-to-sewer. We've had a tremendous push offering people some ARPA dollars to sweeten the pot, and so we've gotten 21 out of 37 people signed up in the last month or two. Sykes M, N, and T, the bid opening was supposed to be last Thursday, but Hurricane Milton was here, and so that bid opening was delayed to day before yesterday. And so we're going to show you the bid results under the agenda item at the end of the agenda. Jumping down to stormwater basins, Flounder has been contracted to W&J Construction. Pioneer, we had one bid. It was universal contracting. It looks to be close enough to the construction cost estimate and the budget that we should be able to award. We're going through the vetting process for that one. However, Flamingo, we received two bids. One was 4 times the engineer's estimate. The other one was more than 10 times the engineer's estimate. So that is not looking like we're going to be able to get across the finish line with that one anytime soon. The Titusville Causeway Multitrophic Restoration Living Shoreline Resiliency Project has over 280 of the wave attenuation devices poured, and they are expecting near-shore placement to begin in late November. And then under contracts, I just wanted to highlight the Merritt Country Mobile Home Park septic-to-sewer. That is removing 19 septic tanks that serve 35 buildings. And so that's a great project to get that one done. For presentations this month, we've been coordinating with the zoo and their oyster gardening program. And so September 27th was when they had the homecoming, when everybody that was raising oysters for the last year were turning their oysters in to go out to projects. So that was an opportunity to see the existing gardeners. And then they've invited us to also give a quick presentation and provide information to all the new gardeners that are getting trained. And so you'll see a whole lot of things listed there as gardener training, that's oyster gardener training. And Brandon and Abby have been sort of cooperating, coordinating, tackling those sessions. I'm going to go to the Little Growers Make a Green Noise event in Melbourne tomorrow. And then we have some exciting public events. The Indian River Lagoon Science Festival down in Fort Pierce. And if you click that link, they've got all sorts of great speakers and demonstrations and things for families. Looks like it's going to be a great event. And then Indian River Lagoon Day here in Melbourne at Front Street on November 9th. The Coalition, Indian River Lagoon Coalition, has their Straight Talk event on December 10th. And I think that's all I wanted to highlight this month. Thank you.
All right. Dr. Winter, please.
Would you mind saying again, I didn't quite catch it, the stormwater basins, the bids were received and were over, by how
Yes.
much was that?
Flamingo.
By-
Flamingo Basin 1280B, the low bid was about 4 times the engineer's cost estimate, and the high bid was about 10 times.
So I thought, okay, thank you.
Don, please.
Yeah, Fish and Wildlife Commission was starting a program called Boats at Risk to catch boats before they became derelict vessels. Whatever happened to that program, and why can't we implement something like that? Because, I mean, how many, 30-some boats went up? Most of those we would have said, you would have gone out there and said, those are going to come up in a storm.
I think some of them, yes, I'm not sure most of them, but, yeah, there were no people and positions added with that rule. So you've got to have enforcement people out there on the water looking for those vessels and hunting down those owners and talking to them. So I think it's a resource problem, but we can ask for more information.
Yeah, that's an awful lot of boats to come up in storms.
I do know we've got the ALA areas, the anchor leave areas, that Matt Culver and the county is working with the city of Melbourne, and I think there's 4 of them, and those require a boat to move. Is it a mile every 30 days?
I think
or
it's 7 miles
45
every
days?
45
7
days.
miles every 45 days. So
Those
one,
are fairly limited, though.
yeah, for now, they are.
Yeah.
I know that there were other municipalities that were looking. Yeah, Cocoa was looking at joining in too, and so, it's one of those problems there's no one silver bullet, but
Yeah.
it definitely is an issue. All right. Did you have anything else, Dr. Winter?
No.
Okay. All right, Virginia, that Flamingo Basin project, how many pounds of nitrogen is that? Is that one of our big?
No, it's not
I didn't
terribly
think so.
big.
Yeah.
And I've got the quarterly.
I mean, I know those expenses and prices are going up.
Do you have a better idea of where on there's Pioneer, there's Flamingo. It is 161.
Pounds, okay. All right. Yeah, Bobby, please.
Yeah, just what is, just a couple of the event questions. This weekend, which one were you, what's the event you're doing? And November 9th, the Lagoon event, the Melbourne puts on. I don't think that's on the list.
It's the next
It's-
one.
Indian River Lagoon.
Lagoon Day.
Sorry, So under
Oh.
science forums and
I'm
public
looking at
events.
the volunteer.
Yeah,
Okay.
number 2 and 3 under the
And
forums
what's
and
the
public
one,
events.
what
So
is that this weekend?
the Little Growers is a local organization that's working with students to do backyard and community gardens to teach them like where food comes from and how things work and sort of tie it to the environment. And the lady that runs it is very involved in
Camille
so many
Hadley.
different community things and resiliency and underserved communities. And she's a real go-getter, get things done, and rallies great participation. So I believe this is a new event.
It's the first time I've heard of it,
Can
and
I
I-
get some info for that, so I can share it as well? I think I have some people that might like to bring their
Can you
kids.
just forward that email to?
And I actually spoke to this group. I was fortunate, Camille asked me over the summer as part of a summer camp day. And it was really cool talking to these kids. And I kind of set them up as a little COC. I said, okay, you've got $10 million. What projects are you going to work on? And so they had big boards and they were drawing all these, the cool designs and stuff. And so when they were done, I was like, congratulations, you just completed a COC event. So it was fun. And then there were a couple parents that showed up that were like, I didn't even know that about the lagoon. So she is focused on a target of the community that we don't often see or hear from. So it's really cool.
I think it's 9 to 1.
Yeah. And they have food.
Thank you.
Oh, leave it to the Italian to bring that up. I'm with you, Charles. All right.
Yes, and thank you to the committee members who shared that event with us and encouraged us to go.
Yeah, good stuff. Okay. Any other questions for the monthly progress report for Virginia? Otherwise, we'll move forward. All right. Thank you very much, Virginia. A lot of work for you and your staff. And then we'll go for the monthly revenue graph and financial statements with our very own Molly. Hi, Molly.
Hello, good morning, everybody. So for July, we received 4.2 million in collections, so now we're at 413 million. And then for the monthly, for our budget, we're at 418 million, and total assigned is 379 million. And for expenditures, our total assigned is 69 million, and our actuals is almost 20 million. Any questions?
Anybody have any questions for Molly? All right.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much, Molly. I always try to look at the slope of the line, and it looks like it's, a little bit lower this month. Hopefully,
Yeah, last month was a fantastic month.
It was.
This month was a slumpy month. The last, this calendar year has been,
roller coaster
yes.
as far as that slope.
Yes.
Yeah, that line chart.
So next month, we'll look into the crystal ball and try to project out the next 2 years, and it's going to be much harder than in the past because it has been such a roller coaster.
Well, I think Molly said 413, right? Was our total collected? And so if we were anticipating 580, we're about, 160 away?
Yes, and for the year, we're a little over 800 behind,
Okay,
800,000,
okay.
yeah.
All right. Thank you, Molly, and Virginia, and Terry. All right, we'll go right into our first report and presentation. We've got our Seagrass mapping with Lauren Hall, St. Johns River Water Management District.
But she's going to provide a bonus.
I heard a rumor that we're also going to get a bonus water quality update, which is just fantastic.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. I always enjoy talking to y'all. So I'm going to start off with the first half of the presentation is going to be just a really brief, the last month and a half, recent water quality conditions in the lagoon. And this is going to be from our continuous monitoring sites that we have 6 throughout the lagoon, from Mosquito Lagoon down to the Vero area. So we'll start with that. Like I said, we're going to do those 6 stations that we have for continuous monitoring, but I just wanted to remind everyone that we also have our ambient monthly monitoring that we do. We have 31 active stations in the lagoon and then 23 active tributary stations. Those samples are a broader suite of parameters that we look at. So those are grab samples that are collected monthly, sent to our lab for analysis, and those are the ones that are going to have all your nutrient analysis in addition to your physical parameters. The continuous monitoring sites focus really heavily on just those physical parameters. Okay, so let's kick it off with precipitation. So we all know we've had a tremendous amount of rain these last couple of months. Leading into the summer, we really had a pretty dry period. We had a wet winter, but then we went into a pretty dry period. But we are officially in that really rainy season now, and you can see how that rainfall has been distributed. Just a heads up, the October is, of course, only through this week. But we've gotten, just slammed with rainfall. So how is that affecting everything throughout the lagoon? So the continuous monitoring sites, I'm just going to run through the figure on the left. Will show you where those sites are located. We have a site in southern Mosquito Lagoon, the IRL MLO2. We have a site in Titusville that is right off the Titusville Pier. A site at I-13 in Cocoa in the IRL. And then over a little bit further east, we have B04, which is in Banana River Lagoon, and that's in Cocoa Beach area. And then our two southernmost sites, I-21 and the CM Vero sites, those are located just outside of tributaries. So we have the I-21 is located just outside of O'Galley River, and CM Vero is just north of the 60 Bridge. So those tend to be sites that are more impacted by that tributary freshwater input. Okay, so getting into the figures that are on the right-hand side, these are our depths. These are where the sondes are positioned in the water. So it's really just any changes that you're seeing relative to where that sonde is positioned. It's sent down to the same spot, so any time you're seeing this water level changes, that's indicative of what's happening in the lagoon. We are a microtidal system, so most of our water level changes are either seasonal changes or wind-driven changes, and a little bit with rainfall, but really a lot of the big changes we tend to see are just seasonal changes. We just had our big fall water level rise, and then right after that, we started to get these storms. So you can very clearly see when Milton hit, everything changed. Just briefly, the B04 site that we have there, this is missing data. We actually lost the entire data logger into the bottom of the lagoon during Milton. So we're gonna hopefully be able to retrieve that and to put that back out there soon. We do have a sonde that is still out there recording data, but we have to manually download that data because we don't have the telemetry set up right now because of the storm. So. All right, moving on to water temperature, we are starting to get into the cooler time, so of course the water temperatures are starting to decline, but we're not really seeing anything very dramatic yet. Salinity, we were doing really well with salinity. Our salinity had been very high for quite a while at most of our sites. The site in Mosquito Lagoon was actually above 30 parts per thousand for quite a while. And then, of course, as we started getting all this rainfall in these last couple of months, we're starting to see that salinity decline. We're looking at about a 5 parts per thousand decline at almost all of our sites at this point. Once you drop below that 21 parts per thousand, that's where it starts to get a little bit problematic for seagrasses, but depends on the seagrass. Some are more tolerant than others. So you can see at the CM Titusville site, we're showing that that's below 21 parts per thousand in this figure, but we're actually having some problems with the sensor there because our wiper blade is not functioning properly. So I think that's more indicative of some fouling that's happening, and hopefully we'll get that taken care of next week. And of course, the B04 site is still missing that data. Moving on to dissolved oxygen, as the temperature drops and as salinity declines, the water can hold on to oxygen better than when we have high salinities and warmer temperatures. So as we get into the winter months, we tend to see less problems with dissolved oxygen. Once we drop below 3 milligrams per liter, that's when it starts to be problematic for the animals out there. So we're really not seeing anything that is staying below that 3 milligrams per liter for any sort of long period of time. So things have been very good out there for dissolved oxygen over this last month and a half. For some reason, we are having a problem again. Sensors, these things kind of come and go. It's a constant battle to keep everything up and running. So we're having a problem with that particular sensor at MLO2, but that should be replaced next week as well. Okay, moving on to pH. Nothing dramatic tends to really happen with pH out there. It tends to be very consistent. So there's nothing really noteworthy here. And moving on to turbidity, I just want to point out that the MLO2 site in this particular slide is a different scale than the other sites. You can clearly see when our 2 storms passed in late late September, and then, of course, Milton just recently. Those turbidity spikes, is indicative of things just getting stirred up or any kind of freshwater pulses that we're getting from the storms. But one thing that I do want to point out is that you can see that turbidity drops just as quickly as it spiked. So that's really good for seagrasses, because of course turbidity is going to impact the amount of light that can reach our seagrasses. Moving on to FDOM, so this is an indicator of how much color is in the water. The only site here that has a different scale is our CM Vero site, and that, again, these are the sites, I-21 and CM Vero are closer to our freshwater tributaries, so we do tend to see higher FDOM at those sites. Just because there's higher color in the water doesn't necessarily mean that the clarity is bad, it just means that there's a lot more tannins in the water. Sometimes you can see just as clearly through it. And then moving on to chlorophyll A, of course, this is indicative of what sort of phytoplankton blooms we have going on out there. Once we get to about 30 micrograms per liter, it becomes a more visible bloom for us, where we can see it with the naked eye. And so we do see these little spikes here and there. They're most likely Pseudonychia. We have been seeing these patches of Pseudonychia out there over the last couple of months. But the good thing about Pseudonychia is it tends to not be really widespread. It tends to be very patchy. It pops up, it goes away, it pops up again and goes away. So we really, in the last several months, have not had any prolonged phytoplankton blooms. So that's been really positive, and we're starting to see those positive results. Okay, I'm just going to pause real quick to see if anybody has questions about water quality.
Laura Lee.
Thank you, that was great. I know that there's a lot of sand on the road at Wayland Beach again, and there was some overwashing. Did it go into the lagoon again? Did we have enough of an overwash to put more seawater into the ski lagoon?
That's a good question, but I don't know the answer. I'm not sure about that.
Okay.
Virginia?
Well, Anthony pulled up aerial images that looked like. yeah,
Like it did?
like
Okay.
it did, but yeah, we haven't been out in the field.
Good. Thank you.
Yes, Lorraine.
Yeah, no, I wanted to ask, there seemed to be more seaweed that washed up, more debris, at least where I am, from this storm. What is that a result of? I mean, there were large patches of it versus storms, and I've lived in this particular area been watching it for 14 years.
So on the west bank of the Indian River in the
Yeah.
Cocoa area, on the south side of 520 or
Oh, yeah.
528?
So some of that could just be
The
that.
south side of
that
528,
Some
yeah.
seasonal changes too. We're seeing a lot more senescence of blades, so there's a lot more just seagrass blades floating in the first place, and when the wind pushed it up towards that shore, you're going to see it coming up like that. That area is also an area where we have a lot of Caulerpa prolifera, which is a benthic algae that tends to be uprooted more easily than seagrass.
Okay.
It doesn't have the same kind of root system. So it doesn't have, the long roots that go down into the sediment and can hold on tightly. So it has more of a rhizoid. It's not really a true root.
Okay.
So it
yeah.
could be a lot of Caulerpa that you're seeing.
So,
washing up.
yeah, it threw out piles of it, at the low end of Indian River Drive, yeah.
But the pre-storm wind direction for sort of a day and a half leading up to the storm was
Well, there was a lot of
blowing
flooding.
stuff
That whole area
in- yeah.
flooded,
All
and
of
then
those
it left
corners
all
of the
seaweed
causeways on the, northwest corners.
on the northwest corners, okay.
All right. Bobby, yes.
Yeah, I was just, to the monitoring sites, I just noticed there's a big gap in between. And that is a gap where we have a lot of issues with water stuff. Is there reasons, maybe not like nothing at Turkey Creek or maybe the C1 Canal, because it's also, and there's a couple of rural sites too, so it might be an interesting thing to see what kind of differences there are in the developed areas and the or not so developed areas.
Yeah, and I'll make a note specifically of those couple areas that you're bringing up. But when we were selecting where to put these sites, we also worked with some of the other agencies that have continuous monitors out there. So they might be some areas that are covered by the Orca group where they have instruments out, so we can kind of fill in some of those gaps with their data as well. And Harbor Branch also has their Erlon network. And so we tried to put our sites where there weren't already existing sites.
And they do fill in that area.
They do?
The Kilroy, the Orca Kilroys?
Right.
No, the Erlon.
And the
Or
Erlon.
And the Erlons. Okay.
Orchid tends to be
Has a Sebastian
mostly
in it.
atmospheric stuff.
I'm not
Okay.
sure, yeah, I lose track of which
Rely
ones are
tends to
where.
be
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just what they're doing.
Okay. Okay, great. Any other questions? I had one, Virginia, I remember, was it after Irma, I think that Anthony did a satellite image of the lagoon and how quickly it cleaned up after the storm? I know that was one of our goals. And so I know, Lauren, as you talked about your instant measurements, but I know you have some that you're collecting. It'd be really cool, I think, if we could gather an overall, maybe reaching out to some of the other monitoring stations, just to really see, because storms like this with this amount of fresh water, we thankfully don't see often, but this much water might give us a worst-case scenario as we move forward. But I love the fact that the spikes come and go, because that really shows the resiliency of the lagoon, which has been the goal.
And salinity takes a lot longer to recover than something like turbidity. So those turbidity spikes come and they settle back out fairly quickly.
Yeah.
But something like salinity does take quite a while to recover. I recall back in 2008 when we had Tropical Storm Faye, we didn't have these continuous monitors out there to be able to watch that, but we were doing weekly monitoring, just going out and taking grab samples. And it took, I want to say it was about 7 months before the Melbourne area returned to pre-storm salinities.
Wow.
So it can take quite a while depending on the amount of rainfall.
And I think like that type of measurement and seeing it now in comparison, and then if there is another storm down the road, just looking at these big events and seeing how they affect the system. Sorry, Virginia, were you going to say something?
Just, we had the big moon last night
The
before last,
harvest-
whatever,
harvest
and,
moon.
right, so those water levels are up, the ocean water in, so I don't know, I'm hopeful we'll see the salinity recover faster this time than usual, but we can look at the other stations'
And during
data.
Faye, I mean, in that situation, we had 25 inches of rain, I think, in a single day.
Yeah.
So it was dramatic.
Yeah. Okay, great. Any other questions for Lauren? And then we'll move on to her next presentation. She's got the double header, seagrass mapping.
All
Thank
right,
you.
so now I want to talk a little bit about our seagrass monitoring results. And so for our seagrass monitoring program, we actually have 2 levels of monitoring that we do. We have our Tier 1 big picture monitoring that's done through aerial photography, and then we have our in-water transects, that's the finer scale monitoring that we are doing at these transects that are actually in water, where we can get a lot of more detailed data than we can get from the aerial mapping. So for the lagoon-wide mapping, we do cover the entire lagoon, not just the St. John's District. This is a joint effort between the water management districts, both South Florida and St. John's, and Department of Environmental Protection, who also contribute to fund this project. We start off, this is done every 2 years. We start off with aerial photos that are taken in late spring, early summer. And we do that because that's when we tend to get higher biomass seagrasses, so it's easier to be able to map. But we also try to do it before we start getting all those phytoplankton blooms that tend to come with the warmer water in that time of the year. When we do the aerial photos, we also do a lot of ground truthing that we use both to do the photo interpretation, but also to that we hold on to, that we don't share with the photo interpreters, so that we can later do an accuracy assessment at the end of the map to make sure that we have a highly accurate map that we're sharing. And then, of course, we're able to do our change analysis. The use of the maps has evolved over time. In the early 80s, we were really just using it for status and trend analysis, but it really started to get used for a lot of other purposes as we went through the years. It helped us in 2000 for establishing a lot of our targets for our TMDLs, and then evaluating those targets has continued on through the years. In the early 2020s, we started using it to evaluate the persistence of the different grass beds out there. So how long have those grass beds been in these different locations, and how can we use that to help us figure out where the best places would be, maybe to aid in restorations for site selection. So, so we're using this for a lot of different reasons now, not just simply status and trend anymore. And of course, it's always going to continue to be used for BMAP and TMDL compliance. The in-water transects, these are done at 102 sites throughout the lagoon. Again, it covers the entire lagoon from New Smyrna down to Jupiter. We do this in conjunction with several other agencies, otherwise we would not be able to get this all done. So huge kudos to the agencies that have stuck with us since 1994 doing all of this monitoring. It's really an incredible data set. So at 102 sites, we run a line from shore out to the deep edge of the grass bed. We do this in winter with the lowest biomass and in summer with our highest biomass. Every 5 to 50 meters along that line, we put down a quadrat where we take a variety of parameters, and it's everything from the simple stuff like water depths to things like our seagrass percent cover and occurrence, canopy height, shoot density. But then we also want to know what sort of macroalgae we have there. So we looked at our drift macroalgae percent cover and biomass. And then we also monitor for Caulerpa prolifera, which I mentioned a little bit earlier. That is that attached benthic macroalgae as well. We also look at epiphyte cover, which is the fuzzy algae that can grow on the seagrass blade that can also inhibit seagrass from taking up light. We do take water quality at these sites, but because we're only doing this twice a year, when it comes to evaluating how water quality is impacting seagrasses, we do go back to that ambient monitoring a lot more often than the monitoring that we do here for water quality. Okay, so getting into some of the results. So this is from the aerial photography seagrass mapping, and I'm including the two maps that I'm showing here are 2009, which is some of our best seagrass maps that we've gotten before the bloom started in 2011, and then the most recent seagrass map, which was 2023. We do another one in 2025, so 2024 is not a mapping year. And so you can see the pretty dramatic change. You can see all the grass that's mapped in 2009 and then what we've got mapped into 2023. On the right-hand side in the bar chart, I'm going to just walk you through some of these big changes that we've seen. We have years across the x-axis and mapped seagrass in hectares on the y-axis. And so you can see for a while we were fairly stable. We started to see this increase in 2007 and 2009, and then in 2011 we got hit with the big phytoplankton bloom that a lot of us refer to as the super bloom, and that's when we saw that initial first really big decline. 2013 to 2015 was a really quiet period for phytoplankton blooms in the lagoon, and so we started to actually see a little bit of recovery in that mapped seagrass. But then we got hit with a big bloom in 2016, and so it declined just as quickly, even lower than the first decline in 2011. And then down to our lowest amount, which was in 2021, which was just around 8,000 hectares. And so then in 2023, we're starting to see a little bit of recovery. So that was really exciting to see that. We're at almost 10,000 hectares now for 2023. But it hasn't recovered, it's not recovering everywhere. We're not seeing it uniformly recovering throughout the lagoon. And really most of that recovery and that increase in hectares has happened in the Mosquito Lagoon, particularly the Southern Mosquito Lagoon, a little bit in Northern IRL. In Southern IRL, we're actually seeing a little bit of a decline from 21 to 23, but it's possible that that's just a little bit of complexities being able to map some of the smaller seagrasses that they have down there. A lot of the Halophilus species are only a few centimeters tall, and they're harder to see in an aerial photo. So kind of a little bit of a shift from those canopy species like Halidule, Syringodium, Thalassia, and now a lot of these smaller, more pioneer species that we're starting to see. So there probably is still some seagrass down in these areas that is not being mapped, and it's just difficult to map from an aerial. Okay, so now moving on to adding the transects to that same bar chart. Our mean transect length is being shown here with the black line, and then our mean transect percent cover is being shown with the gray line. And really what I want to be able to say about this is that the transects really help us fill in the gaps between mapping years. So since we're only mapping every other year, we wouldn't know what was happening on the in-between years without this transect data. And the transect data can actually show us that in 2010, we even saw a little bit more of an increase in that footprint, because transect length is also measuring footprint, just like the maps, than we even had in our 2009 seagrass map. And so that also confirms for us that the decline that we saw in 2011 was associated with 2011, that there wasn't something going on before that. So another thing that I want to point out is that the new dot that we see there for 2024, I don't have the mean transect cover completely entered in Q8 yet, so I'm not presenting that, but you do see an increase in transect length for 2024, even compared to our 2023. So we're seeing additional increase in our transect footprint, in our seagrass footprint out there, which is great news. But we're still a long way away from where we were in 2009, certainly worth mentioning. Just like with the maps, this increase was not everywhere. And so I really just want to draw your attention to these 3 circles that I just put up for Northern IRL, Mosquito Lagoon, and Banana River Lagoon. We are seeing most of that transect length increase happening in those 3 sublagoons. We are not seeing a recovery in Central IRL and at all, really, no recovery in percent cover or in that transect length. South IRL has been pretty stable. South Central has been pretty stable over these last couple of years. So really, it's those 3 areas that I'd indicated before. So since I didn't have the new gray dot to be able to show you the 2024 seagrass cover, I wanted to just take a couple of example sites so I can give you something, just some preliminary data. So starting with the one that I have highlighted in blue, the Northern Indian River Lagoon Epcot site. This site is pretty exciting. In 2023, we had almost no seagrass at all along this site. And this is a site that is on the eastern shore, just north of Hallover Canal in the IRL side. I think there were just 3 or 4 hand-sized clumps of seagrass there in 2023. And in summer 2024, there were hundreds of meters of continuous seagrass, or really dense patches of seagrass. And so you're seeing that on that mean percent cover, where you see that little green bar now starting to pop back up. Again, we're still a ways away from where we were, but it was really exciting to see that recovery. Moving over to the right-hand side, the Biolab site. This site in Mosquito Lagoon, in southern Mosquito Lagoon, recovered a little bit earlier than that Epcot site, so we were seeing an increase in 2023. And then in 2024, it stayed right about there. So just a tiny decline, but we're still at about 50% cover for the mean transect cover for that site. So that's great news that it stayed. And we've had a lot of questions about the manatee impact up there, because a lot of the manatees that had previously been in Banana River did move to Mosquito Lagoon, where there was still seagrass present. And you can see that we've maintained that percent cover even with the presence of manatees. So that was really great to see. Just going down to the next graph that's highlighted in orange, our Cars Park site in Banana River. Similar to what we saw in Epcot, we had almost nothing there in 2023 and then an explosion in 2024. And so, again, really nice recovery, natural recovery. This is not planted grass. This is natural recruitment. Shifting over to the left-hand side, the site highlighted in yellow, this is in the Central IRL. And again, like I mentioned before, just really nothing going on there. No seagrass recovery at all. And then I did want to just share a southern site with you as well. So this is a site that we have just south of Fort Pierce on the western shore. It's our Midway site, and we're seeing a little bit of recovery in 2024, but just a little tiny bump up. And that is also probably those pioneer species that I mentioned, the Halophilus species. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about Caulerpa. We have not been mapping Caulerpa. We've been mapping seagrasses. We do take data on Caulerpa at our seagrass transects when we're doing those lines from shore out to that deep edge. But we do it to the deep edge of the seagrasses, not to the edge of the Caulerpa beds. And a lot of Caulerpa can be in that deeper water. And so our information that we were getting from our transects was a little bit limited, and we were feeling like we weren't getting a full picture of what was happening with Caulerpa. So we were able to get some funding from FWC to map using our 2023 aerial photos that were taken for seagrass to then map for Caulerpa and try to get an idea of how much Caulerpa is throughout the lagoon. We did a more limited footprint. We didn't do the entire lagoon, but we focused on areas that we knew had Caulerpa present based on our transect data. And so it covered the northern IRL, down through central IRL just south of Melbourne, and Banana River Lagoon. And you can see where Caulerpa was mapped for 2023, we had over 15,000 hectares through this section. We had an 80% accuracy, which is a little bit lower than what we get for seagrass, for the seagrass mapping. And again, I think that has to do with the fact that Caulerpa tends to grow in deeper water, and it's just harder to see. So when it's in that real deep water, you start to chase a lot of shadows. So one of the lessons learned that we had from this mapping effort is that we're going to need additional ground truthing if we want to be able to really fully accurately map Caulerpa. So that's something that we're working into our next round of Caulerpa mapping. And just to bring you back to the 2023 seagrass in comparison to the 2023 Caulerpa map, we had just about 10,000 hectares of seagrasses, and that's lagoon wide, and we had 15,000 hectares in that limited portion of Caulerpa. So just to really drive home the point that Caulerpa is a really important component in the system, Caulerpa can absorb nutrients. It can also release nutrients when it dies back. We have to be able to account for this other habitat that's out there. It can serve some of the same ecosystem services that seagrasses do, but it's in some of the areas where you're seeing this mapped, and I don't know if you recall from the seagrass maps that I was showing, but it's in a lot of areas where seagrass is not present. And so Caulerpa is kind of filling in that habitat that seagrass typically would have been filling in the past. There have been some questions about whether or not Caulerpa and seagrass, if Caulerpa is outcompeting seagrass. From our transect data, we are not seeing evidence of that, but what we do see evidence of is that when the seagrass declines, Caulerpa is very good at taking advantage of that empty space, and it fills in very quickly. Now, will it impact the ability of seagrass to recover once it's there and it's taking up that space? That still kind of remains to be seen. So we're incorporating the Caulerpa map into our seagrass mapping contract for 2025, so we're really excited to get another round of Caulerpa mapping. One more project that I wanted to talk about is a seed distribution analysis that we're doing. This is a project that was funded by Department of Environmental Protection, and it's being done with Florida Institute of Technology, Austin Fox's lab. We did a preliminary study with my intern Isabel Bennett last year at just a handful of sites, about 20 sites, to figure out whether or not we had any kind of seed presence, any seagrass seeds present out there. And we were finding quite a bit of seeds. And so we expanded that project. We are now doing 70 sites within the St. John's district. And so far, we have evaluated 42 of the sites, and we're finding some really interesting things. We've had Haladuli present, and this is all just preliminary, kind of hot off the press from Isabel last week. We've had Haladuli present at 9 sites, and we've had Rupia present at 38 of the 42 sites. So this kind of information can really help us figure out where seagrass is likely to recover on its own, like some of that natural recovery we've seen in Banana River, Northern IRL, and Mosquito Lagoon, and what areas are unlikely to recover on their own that we may have to assist with things like plantings and active restoration. So this is a really great component to bring to the big picture. Okay, so I know I did a lot of talking. Let me just summarize it really quickly. So recovery has been continuing. 2023, we saw some recovery. We're seeing additional recovery in 2024. Hopefully, Milton didn't have a huge impact on things, and we're going to continue to see that recovery and be able to capture it in our 2025 seagrass maps. We do need more information on seed banks and natural recruitment, and we're hoping to get that with this DEP-funded work that we're doing. But really, even the presence of seeds, that's great. But we need the right conditions for the seeds to germinate and then survive. And so the right conditions are still crucial for recovery, no matter what kind of recovery we're talking about, whether it's something that we're assisting or something that's recruiting on its own. So again, it just always goes back to reducing nutrients, remaining the key to help our water quality stay conducive for seagrass growth. With less nutrients, we have less phytoplankton blooms, and we have better water clarity, and that's what the seagrass ultimately needs. And with that, if I have time, I'll take more questions.
Okay, Lauren, thank you. Yeah, Dawn, please.
Yeah,
And then Charles.
if you haven't been up to the Cars Park shelf, it's an amazing site. It's just amazing how it recovered.
Where is that, Dawn, exactly?
It's south of Cars Park. There's a huge shelf that goes all the way down to the Barge Canal, and that's all recovering, just amazing.
So the east side
Yeah.
of Merritt Island,
Thank
north
you.
Yeah,
of 528.
yeah, across from the port.
Of course, with the pork, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Great. Charles?
Yeah, it was a dramatic recovery, and it went from almost nothing to really dense, like just continuous grass, like what we had seen years ago in a single year.
Charles?
Yeah, Lauren, great presentations. I just wanted to comment. I've heard some pushback about, planting seagrass that, it's very expensive and it's more of an art at this point than maybe a science. But I think your data really shows that there's been some dramatic recovery, but there's been a lot of areas that have not, and probably may not until maybe we understand better the conditions, the chemicals, the physical conditions that maybe help the areas that did recover, and what's difference with the areas that are not. But it still seems to me that we do need to invest in seagrass planting and the whole process of making this something that we can do like we do with oysters.
Right, so that's a great point. I didn't mention this, but part of the seed distribution study that we're doing also is looking at all of the sediment characteristics as well. So we're looking not just at grain size, but sulfide concentrations and pore water salinity and those types of things. So that's all part of that project. And so we're doing that at sites that have seen recovery of seagrass and sites that have seen no recovery of seagrass. So we're hoping to get a bigger picture from that as well. That whole central Indian River Lagoon area where we're seeing no seagrass recovery is probably going to be one of the areas that we would recommend doing some sort of assisted plantings. But there are a lot of factors that come into play there. Grazing is really problematic, and it's not just grazing by manatees. There are a lot of things that like to eat seagrass. And so we even had some sections that we fenced off, but the fencing was so big that pinfish were still getting.
Seeds?
So we take 10 cores, 10 centimeters into the sediment. We still have a lot of questions about how much sediment do we have to take? Is it in the first 5? Is it in the first 2? Is it, where are we finding most of the seeds? So there are still a lot of things that we're exploring, but we take 10 cores that we've put into a composite sample, and then we evaluate, and then we sieve that through a series of sieves and evaluate for the seeds. Yeah.
Okay.
And so we kind of, we're mirroring a lot of the projects that have been done on the west coast of Florida, looking for seeds. Brad Furman's group out at FWC has done a lot of this work. And so we pretty much are using the same methodology that they use so that we would be able to compare our results to the results that they're having on the west coast.
Awesome. Okay, great. Any other questions for Lauren?
Well,
Bobby, please.
Since you're here and you brought up the cages, a while ago, I was kayaking up Goat Creek in Valkyria, and there was cages, like a series of circle cages that were secured in the water. Is that you guys? Or do you know by chance?
It's not the district. We're not doing any plantings right now, but it could have been the zoo, FOS. There are a few different agencies that are working on plantings right now. I'm not positive. Jenny may know if it's a zoo. Sea and Shoreline? Oh, if they were round.
I think Dawn knows. Dawn, do you
Yeah, it's
know?
for Valleson area, though. It's, yeah, Valleson area, and FWC's doing that. They're financing that. Sea and Shoreline is the ones doing those upside down
contract.
garbage
They're
cans.
pretty big.
Yeah.
But all of the agencies that are doing plantings have found a lot of the same results as far as the need to cage off these
Yeah.
areas. Lorraine Simpson, who is my supervisor at the Water Management District, is trying to pull together a lot of that data right now to be able to make some, big picture recommendations on the impacts of caging and what we need to do and how to move forward with a lot of that.
Great.
Once you add cages to the equation, the permitting gets very difficult too.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions for Lauren? Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Lauren. So committee, do you want to take a break, short break now, or do you want to wait right now? Okay, all right. We'll take a short 10-minute break. All right, thank you, everybody. Thank you again, Lauren, for your presentation. We will continue our presentation on the topic of seagrass with Seagrass Nurseries by Kathy Hill, IRL NEP. Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program.
Correct.
Yes, sorry, I didn't mean to throw those acronyms around.
Right, yeah, so it's the Indian River Lagoon National Estuary Program. We usually say IRL NEP because it's easier to say. So hi, I'm Kathy. Going to talk today, I think Daniel was here not too long ago to talk about the impetus for the Seagrass Nursery. I'm going to give you just a little progress update on that. And then give you a little bit about our NOAA grant that we were just awarded, and then just give you a general update on our regular NEP projects that we fund. We are not on the scale of all of you, probably 100 times less, but we have accomplished quite a bit in the last almost 10 years. So next year will be our 10th anniversary as an independent special district. So we'll be doing some things on that in the coming months.
Big party at Dr. DeFreeze's house?
Probably
Is that what
not
we're
in
doing
his
for the-
house, but
for the
maybe in
10th?
the office, we'll see. All right, so I want to give you a little PTSD first before I get into the progress, just kind of where we were. And this will kind of show the evolution of our thinking as we went through trying to think about how to do seagrass planting, or if we want to do seagrass planting. So you may remember 2009 and, 2010-11, the super bloom. The ensuing years after that were marked by all of these many heinous algae blooms, some big, some, long-lasting, some really thick and terrible. And so people were sort of despairing, after 10 years of constant algae blooms. What are we going to do about this? We have to do something. We've lost a lot of seagrass in the lagoon. And so come about 2020 was when the last large-scale algal bloom occurred in the lagoon. You may remember this, that photo's from Banana River. It was a microcystis cyanobacteria bloom. From 2021 on, there have not been any large-scale blooms in the lagoon. As Lauren said, the blooms that we have had have been short-lived, they've been patchy, they come and go. So they might be really intense, but in a really small area for a very short time. And so that has given us sort of the impetus to kind of say, maybe now might be a good time to start thinking about planting. And we had the idea a little bit before that, but started really thinking seriously about implementing seagrass nurseries, beginning in 2020, 2018 on really. And there are two schools of thought on seagrass, as Charlie said earlier. You can wait until water quality is adequate to kind of ensure your success, and that way you're not throwing money away. Or you can start planting now just to jumpstart the process, even if water quality is not optimal. So two schools of thought, people have very strong opinions on both sides, but we decided to nibble around the edges there. And we funded 7 pilot projects focused on seagrass restoration beginning in 2018. And we learned a lot from these pilot studies. Not all of them were successful, but even with not being successful, you can learn things. And so what we learned was seagrasses can indeed be grown in nurseries, in land-based nurseries, and successfully outplanted into the lagoon. And that's great because then you're not taking healthy seagrass out of the lagoon and moving it someplace else. So you have a source that can be in a land-based system. That was good to know. The success of the experimental plots was heavily impacted by siltation and water quality issues after heavy rains and hurricanes. Hurricanes particularly were bad for our pilot studies. But sediment quality, site stability, all of that plays a role. Herbivory is also a major contributor to failure. And you can see on the bottom photo there, that is a caged site in southern IRL. You can see how great the seagrass is inside the cage. Notice how small the openings in the fence are. So that excluded a lot of predators, not just the manatees and the turtles, but a lot of fish. The great thing about, I didn't have room for another slide on this, but after a couple of months at that site, the seagrass is spread outside the cage. So you can see, spreading outside the cage when you have good conditions. So herbivory is a big, big challenge. Defining success is sometimes relative. And this is super important, but it's also, and it's one of the things people don't generally understand, but if you're starting with 0% cover, what is success? Is success 50%? Is it, do you have to settle for nothing less than 100%? Or is 30% progress? Is that success? And we kind of think that 30% when you have nothing can be a good start. That could be the jump start that the site needs to really get going. So the other thing that we learned is that there is no way that we can plant our way out of the seagrass problem in the lagoon. Recruitment is going to have to become just a part of the natural process. Seagrasses will recover on their own if they are given good conditions to recover with. So we are going to focus our activity in planting seagrasses where we're jump starting. We're not trying to put massive acreage down. We're not going to be able to do that. But jump starting sites that just don't have seagrass is kind of where we want to focus our efforts. So this is our nursery system and our regional restoration center system. And so the idea for this was we kind of realized early on that people are doing lots of great work in oyster restoration and shoreline restoration and clams and now seagrasses. But what are the supply chains like? Is there an adequate supply chain for all of these species and all of these materials? And our answer was no, there's really not. And so we decided to fund these regional centers to help ensure that there were adequate supplies. There was a supply chain for species and materials. And so that's what we've been doing. We started with sort of oysters and shoreline restoration, but the seagrass nurseries have come on as a new thing with those. And so Marine Discovery Center in Edgewater is one of our locations. Brevard Zoo has 2 sites, one at the Hub SeaWorld site in Brevard and one in Rockledge. Sea and Shoreline, which is a private organization, is doing a nursery also at the Hub SeaWorld site. We've got Florida Oceanographic at Harbor Branch. I'm sorry, not Florida Oceanographic, FAU at Harbor Branch. And then Florida Oceanographic in Jensen Beach. And they have quite an extensive nursery at this point. All right, so the status of these. So Marine Discovery Center has recently just finished construction on their nursery. They were sort of the last one to come online. They were very deliberate in how they structured their project. They want to keep it small. They want to keep it for research and their own uses and, just very localized. So they have a very tight system where they're going to grow clams and seagrass. But they have recently tested their tanks and their equipment. They're going to be ready for spring seagrass planting and also for clams. Sea and Shorelines Nursery is constructed down at Hubs. They use a different method. They use plugs, as you can see here. And next year, they're going to expand that nursery more and add a chiller system so that they have consistent water quality throughout the whole time. Brevard Zoo has completed construction on their sites. So Rockledge has finished construction, from what I understand, and the facility at Hubs is fully operational. They have been growing and using seagrasses for outplanting from that system. FAU, Harbor Branch, they have completed, they are going to have a big greenhouse, again, for consistency and kind of maintaining conditions for their seagrasses. They completed their greenhouse design. This was delayed due to the passing of Dennis Hanasak, who was leading that project for us. But they're back on track, and that has, design is completed. They're going to go to construction next. But all of their experimental nurseries, and those are the ones you see in the picture here, those are completed and fully operational. And then Florida Oceanographic, I don't know why I'm having problems with that today, sorry. Florida Oceanographic has, their nursery has been up and running for quite some time. They're going to do a 2-phase upgrade to their system. So in the top photo, if you can see in the back there, there's a really large pond. They call that phase 1. That's their front of house, where the people who come to visit the center can tour and they can see the seagrasses in situ. That's phase 1, front of house. Phase 2, back of house, are the blue tanks that you see here. That's where the public's not allowed, but they're growing tons and tons of seagrass. So they've got a lot of seagrass there. The bottom photo is their seagrass volunteer team at the site. So they've got lots of people that are available as volunteers who have learned about seagrass and learned about the care and maintenance of those systems. So they're doing really well with that. So where we are, we have actually begun to question ourselves a little bit as to, do we really need nurseries if the seagrasses are going to be doing as well as they are in Mosquito Lagoon? But as Lauren said, recovery there, we're hopeful that in a few years, if we can keep the algae blooms under control and avoid, too many hurricanes and freshwater inputs, that we're going to be in a good place for seagrass. But we're hopeful also that as lagoon recovery continues, that we'll be able to take the seagrass nurseries that we're using now for seagrass and turn that for other purposes. So for other species, clams, oysters, whatever happens to be needed, we can take those nurseries and repurpose them for other uses. All right. And in case you haven't heard, I'm going to change gears a little bit and just talk a little bit about our NOAA grant. We were awarded a $9.4 million transformational habitat restoration and coastal resilience grant from NOAA. It was the first time we had ever gone for external funding of this size before. And we really leveraged the power of our management conference. So we have over 100 volunteer members of our management conference and partners that we work with regularly. Leveraged all of that to draw together a team to do this multi-habitat, multi-site restoration. So we've got 10 partnering organizations that we're going to be working with over the next 3 years to accomplish this, 15 locations, and it's hopefully a significant step forward, not only for our program, but for habitat in the lagoon. So you can see the map here. I know that's a little small, but the dots on the map are the locations. So we've got quite a number in Mosquito Lagoon, North IRL, Banana River, Central IRL, and a few in South IRL. But you can see the metrics there. We're going to do 73 acres of seagrass, oyster restoration, living shoreline restoration, mangroves, salt marshes, planting 21 million clams back into the lagoon, reconnecting 2,000 acres of wetlands, and nibbling around the edges for fish habitat and fish passage. And the fish passage is only in one impoundment that we're going to just try and experiment in and see how that goes. And then 3 pilot sites for fish reefs. And those will be located under docks. They're not going to be out in the lagoon. but they'll be located under docks where boats can't get at them, and, there won't be any safety issues. If you want to see the map, we have a webpage up on our site, on our website. It's there at the link. And also you can get there from our homepage as well. So if you just go to One Lagoon, you can get there just from the homepage. And then lastly, this is just a synopsis of all the work the NEP has done in, kind of categorized since 2016 when we became a special district. So 221 projects have completed, a little over 17 million in funding. You can see nutrient reduction and water quality projects, 37 projects, a little over $5 million. Community-based restoration, this is restoration work on habitat restoration using volunteers. So it's not just a company coming in and doing habitats. These are people from the community helping their communities by restoring some kind of habitat. So 76 projects, almost 4 million there. Regular habitat restoration, this would be a county-based or an agency-based restoration, 64 projects, $5 million. And then science, monitoring, and innovation, 44 projects, and a little over $3 million. So this year, right now, we have 45 projects in progress, and we're starting the NOAA grant, so that'll be another 10 contracts on top of that. And then for those of you who are hungry for information, we have put all of our projects from 2016 on our website. You can get there from the link on the bottom. So if you go to One Community, Our Projects, and then look at the project map, you can access all of the information for every single project that we've accomplished. It will give you project details, it'll give you photographs, it'll give you all the funding information and the partners who were involved, and you can get the final reports for every project. So we're very proud of that. We're going to keep that going. And there is some talk, although I'm not sure when that's going to happen, but we may be bringing partner projects into that mix at some point as well. And that's it. That's all I have.
Awesome. Real quick before I open, how long is the NOAA grant? Work, because it's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. We've hired one person to help us so far. And then there are a couple of positions that will be in the various contracts. But it's a 3-year grant, so all of the work beginning to end is 3 years.
3 years? Wow, that's awesome.
Yep.
All right, Laura Lee, sorry, you had your hand raised.
That was great, Kathy, thank you. The fish reefs under the dock, are those the Charlie Simbler
Yes.
design? Okay, yeah, those look really cool.
Yeah, he has tested those apparently and attracted all kinds of fish and lobster and just all kinds of stuff. And so we're going to try it. They were originally in the grant in much more visible, but NOAA wasn't that interested in them, and so they encouraged us to pare that down. We did to just 3 experimental sites, so it's just going to be 3 sites under a dock somewhere, and we'll just monitor that and see how it goes.
Field trip to those docks once it's set up.
Yeah, it's gonna be pretty interesting, I think.
Yeah, lobsters, fish, that sounds good, yeah. Okay, great. Stephanie, please, and then Bobby.
How are you deciding where you're going to put those seagrass plantings how are you going about that process?
Sure, so we're leaving it up to partners, so the people who are getting the contracts to do that, we're leaving it up to them. However, there's been a wealth of information. The county did a seagrass assessment from Mark Fonseca that was really useful. There have been a couple of manuals written from people. Dennis Hanasak wrote a manual for land-based seagrass nursery systems for us before he passed away. So there's a lot of information, a lot of just resources to draw on. And so, yeah, we're counting on that to, yeah, we're not going to just Johnny Appleseed it, because that won't work. We already know that's not going to work. So you have to, you're not going to plant in a mucky site. You're going to plant in something that has a good sediment base, and just, cross your fingers and put up a cage and see how it goes.
Bobby, did you have a question?
Yeah, a couple quick. The fish passages, could you explain that a little bit? And could you elaborate on the sediment quality?
So,
the
yeah,
beginning.
we're being very basic about sediment quality. You know, it's like, does the site have muck? Is it high hydrogen sulfide? You know, is it sand? You know, sand obviously would be the optimal without too much, you know, ammonia and sulfide and things of that nature. Fish passage is happening just in one location, so it's going to be Bee Gum Point in Indian River County. They have been looking, John Schenker and Dave Fuss. So Dave Fuss is Indian River Land Trust. John Schenker is emeritus from Florida Tech. They have been looking at not repurposing, but augmenting mosquito impoundments to aid fish passage. So you may know that impoundments have lots and lots of juvenile fish,
Yeah.
and they're closed off for part of the year. So in the summertime when they're closed, they flood them to break up the life cycle of the mosquito, right? And then they open them in the fall. But we funded these studies over a couple of years. So what the results of that was that when the impoundments are open in the fall, the fish don't move. But they are very active in the summer when the impoundments are closed. So they've been experimenting with doing just a drawdown for a few days in the summer to see if the fish will go out, and they do. And so that's what this is going to be about. They're going to study the movements of the fish, making sure that if you open it in the summer, you know, is it feasible? Because that wouldn't work in all impoundments, but
Yeah.
it is feasible for some impoundments. And so they're going to use bee gum as their model and just see how that goes.
Awesome.
And the end
That's-
point for that would be the juveniles leave at the right time, they're able to recruit into the adult population, and then you have more snook and more tarpon that you can
Yeah.
go out and catch.
Great. Any other questions for Kathy? All right. I love the fact you guys are using the genius of and instead of the tyranny of or. You know,
Yes.
let's do a little planting now and wait, you know, and have the natural recruitment. So
Yeah, that's our motto.
that's awesome.
There is no one thing, it's
That's
and,
it.
and,
It's
and.
It's and.
Right,
All right, great. Kathy,
Thank you.
thank you so much.
sure.
All right, we'll go to the next one, which is investigating methods for seagrass restoration in the Indian River Lagoon. Jenny, good morning. Is it cold out? You've got your neck? That's called wish dressing, right? Wish dressing.
Will it into existence. Well, thank you for letting me come and speak to you today about a project that the county has been working on over what feels like a very long time. I think it started back even in 2020 or so for its conception, and we just finally got to do the planting in June of this year.
Wow.
So we'll be talking about investigating methods for seagrass restoration in the Indian River Lagoon. The purpose behind this project was we applied for a grant with the Florida Resiliency when that was open in 21 or so to plant 1.5 acres of seagrass. And we wanted to do this following the idea that we want to try to understand and better augment this augmented seagrass restoration method and seagrass recovery method by trying to address direct questions that would help us learn about restoration efforts and understand how they might be most efficient and most effective. So not just seagrass success, knowing things are still kind of up and down in the lagoon, but also what it costs. Is one method easier to do than another, and still maintaining a reasonable success, things of that nature. So we ended up choosing 2 locations for this. The maps, the upper right-hand is our William J. Manzo Memorial Park in Titusville, and then the image below that is at Hog Point Cove in Melbourne Beach. That's adjacent to an environmentally endangered lands area. At the lower site, there is a Sorrel-funded oyster bar that was put in place in conjunction with this project, with the idea that if wave energy is a little higher down there, it seemed like the water level was a little more turbid, and we knew that it was a good site for oysters from other previous projects in the Central Lagoon. We hoped that this would be an interesting companion piece to seagrass restoration to test out what if you put a structure, submerged structure offshore and plant seagrass behind it. So how did we get to these sites? We started, like I said, back a number of years ago. I'm actually going to do this in kind of a funny order. The bottom two images are Seagrass Union data. So this is data from the St. Johns River Water Management District showing the number of years. It's a little old, so up to 16 years is still going to only be maybe through, I think, 2019 or 2021 at the latest. So it's older data. But we were looking at the time at that information and saying, okay, we see at the bottom right is our Hog Point Cove. There's up to maybe 12 years where seagrass had been present from the 1940s all the way up into the early to mid 2000s. So that, okay, there's a precedent, but it stopped somewhere around 2013 after those some of those die-offs. There was just nothing again and hadn't been for years. A couple pilot projects happened. We did the work with Dr. Fonseca on building the Seagrass protocol, which is actually the two upper images. So the upper right is our Hog Point Cove site, and we went, oh, there's seagrass low-risk zones to the north and south, and nothing at all right where we want to plant. And that was because there was no seagrass present there from at least 2017, 19, and 21, I think we used, or 15, 17, and 19. So we went, okay, well, we want to try to find a site as well that does have a lower risk score from that site selection tool. So we split the project, said we'll do 3/4 of an acre here, and we'll do 3/4 of an acre at the William J. Manzo Park is where we decided, which is in Titusville. This whole area has a lower risk score. You can see again in that same color map on the lower left that seagrass has been present, again, even up to 13, 14 of the mapping years. So we sort of split it and said, we're not going to put all our eggs in one basket. Let's try 2 sites. With this, we also had been given all these recommendations on how to plant and leverage a restoration project to learn and build an experimental design into it. So that's how we wanted to focus going forward. So the specific questions we decided to address were on herbivory exclusion approaches. Actually, I think this is a slightly older slide deck, so we'll see how this goes. I had a couple pictures in here, sorry. So we're looking at how herbivory exclusion devices may alter performance, and again, including things like what was the cost and how effective and easy is it to maintain them and to put them, to clean them and to build them and how much they cost. The next thing we wanted to look at was the method of anchoring, the planting material itself. You saw earlier pictures of staples, pictures of little plugs. People also use peat pots. So we wanted to investigate, is there any difference in cost or effectiveness with those? What is the planting mosaic? How tightly clumped you have your seagrass if you put more closer together, but then you have a bigger break in between patches that you've planted? Because rarely when you do these plantings, it's not just a blanket of seagrass evenly distributed all over. It's these little patches that are put in place, and then you have gaps and more patches with the hope that they'll spread on their own. So we wanted to play with that patch size. And then finally, does increasing in overall density improve success? And I'm going to get a little bit deeper into why that matters in the next, I'm going to flip my slides here, in the next slide. So one method that we see on large-scale projects is where seagrass is planted in a couple of tight clumps, and then kind of scattered about low density little plugs. So the pinkish box here is our plot size. It's an 8 meter by 8 meter plot, and all the little squares that you see in the pink are 1 meter by 1 meter. So what people will do is they'll plant in a meter, they'll skip a meter or 2 meters, and then they'll plant again. In this case, the standard that you'll see in mitigation and these really like multi-acre projects a lot of times is they'll scatter about the little zoomed in picture there. You can kind of just barely see 5 darker boxes. That's a caged area. You'd have 5 peat pots put in place for about 75 shoots within that meter squared area. You get 2 of those in this size. I kind of scaled back from multi-acre down to this size. So we'd have 2 of those, and then all the rest of those pink squares, in this case, got 90 smaller peat pots. So these are only 1 to 3 shoots instead of 15 to 20. And the idea is that you're protecting a bigger clump to let them establish and spread, and then you're also sort of sprinkling about all these little clumps, hoping that some of them will spread, some of them are going to get eaten, and you're hedging your beds. But the overall density when you plant this is only about 330 shoots in this whole area, which is quite low. And I think it works in certain areas, but what about areas where we have higher wave energy, or we really have just lost all stabilization because there's nothing there? So we had additional treatments that we wanted to start getting at those other questions about planting mosaic and anchoring type. So consistently through this, you're going to see that the darkest color, the most bold color, is our unplanted area within an 8 meter by 8 meter area. The kind of cross pattern in the middle that are lighter tone, those are planted, and then the muddier colors on the edges, those are planted and have some sort of exclusion device. The column on the left, we kept, I should back up for a second, the total density for all of these, all four that you see, is that we put 1,900 shoots in the 64 square meter area. So instead of 300 and some, we have almost 2,000. So much higher overall density. We also, like I said, played with that mosaic. So the column on the left gives you every one of those treatments. We have about 200 shoots in a planted area, in a planted clump. And what we played with were the top row, we had a fence and a staple. So fences go up out of the water instead of a cage that typically has a lid and is lower. In our test, the fences also have a little bit of a bigger opening than the cages. And then we kept staples for our anchors. And in the small box, which again, I'm sorry, it's a little bit hard to see, but there are 14 what we call planted units. So those have about 15 shoots per unit. With the staples, the rhizomes get bundled together, they get put around a garden staple and planted. So we have 14 of those to get to our 200 shoots. Stepping down one row, we switched from fence to cage. So we kept the staples the same, but we put cages. Cages have a top on them and a smaller opening. And then slipping to the bottom row, we keep the cage the same, but switch to peat pots. Peat pots, actually, the whole pot gets planted. They break the side down, they plant it in a hole and cover it. Cover the rhizomes with native sediment. So those are all comparable in some way in pairwise fashion. And then to look at the mosaic, we step over to the other column. Now we have, instead of only 9 planted areas, we went up to 32. But instead of putting 14 little bundles of seagrass in, we only put 4 in each of those. So much lower density with less gaps between them, but many more to get to a different type of distribution, a different mosaic. And kept the cage same. There's 4 cages placed within an 8 by 8 meter area. So we have both caged and uncaged on every treatment type. So one of the other big things that came out of the Seagrass protocol project that was done was plant in either a randomized block or a Latin square design so that you can test this and have replicates. So we had 5 treatments. We also have 5 replicates of each of those treatments, which meant we had 25 blocks of seagrass to plant according to those. And yes, my subcontractors loved me for making them do this. It was very complicated. There was a lot of color coding. So this, we went with the Latin square design, which basically just helps you assure that every treatment gets to experience any random things that may be happening in the environment. If the depth's a little deeper, if maybe there's a little bit of difference in the sediment from one end of the project to the other, so that you can kind of wash that out when you do your averages later. So the top is William Manzo, and the bottom is Hog Point. We nestled it behind the oyster bar at Hog Point there. And there's a lot of other little dots and crosses and squares, but what I really just want to drive home is that we have a lot of sensors out there to also give us all of our environmental parameters. So you see some are on the outside and some are right in the midst of our, this is a 3/4 acre approximately area that was planted at each location. One more way of looking at it, just to kind of drive the point home, I tried to make a little cartoon to make it easier. Looking at how our treatments align with our questions. So our question 1, what is the effect of herbivory exclusion? We get to compare treatments 1 and 2 so that we've only changed the cage type. For the second question as to what material, if there's an effect of the material or the anchoring method, we can compare treatments 2 and 3. Everything else is the same, but the staple changed to a peat pot. The third question, our planting mosaic, we can compare treatments 3 and 4. So everything's the same except how many are placed and how close they are to each other. And then finally, how does this overall increase in density and different methods compare to quote unquote standard that you might see in a large scale project? Any of these could be compared to treatment 5. So a couple pictures for a little brain break now from the intense methodology. We have our William J. Manzo site. You can see the boat out there. The cages are kind of tipped up on their side. They're actively planting the seagrass, and then they put the cages back down over the top. The two lower images are staple units that have just been planted. The mesh you see in the foreground of the one on the left is a fence, and then the one on the right is an area that was left uncaged with no herbivory exclusion, no fence, no cage. And this is one of those higher density, more spaced out cluster treatment types. In addition to, we'll get into the biological monitoring in a minute, but to get a context for this project, we have a lot of environmental data we're collecting. We have a whole suite of continuous sensors looking at the water depth, the amount of light in the water, the amount of light coming in from out of the water, the DO concentration, salinity, temperature, all these sorts of things. The two bottom left images show you our sensor housing deployed in the water for conductivity, light, temperature, and DO, and then the one on the cinder block that's on the shoreline, that's our incident light. I will also like to give credit to Austin Fox's lab and Brevard Zoo. These are their designs for the housings, and they work really great. So I didn't have to start that from scratch, which was lovely. The bottom right is really just a little brain break for everyone. Really cute stone crab that moved in within a couple weeks, and it was gigantic, taking up the entire space inside one of my sensors, but you do got to watch out when you do change your sensors out, because there's lots of little critters in there. On the right is our event-based monitoring. So we kind of redo all the things that we're doing continuously just to make sure all our sensors are working properly. And then we also know that understanding photosynthetic active radiation is important, that PAR. So we've got that being measured when people come out for biological. So our biological monitoring is subcontracted with Ecological Associates, and they come out monthly for the first 6 months, and then they're going to switch to quarterly for a 2-year period. We want to make sure that we're getting all the different subsets of data for combinations with a minimum of at least 3 samples each. So they randomize what plots they're going to look at every single treatment, every single one of the 25 plots at both sites. They'll do 6 seagrass quadrats, following the St. John's methodology that you guys kind of heard a little bit about this morning. So they will pick 3 from within exclusions and 3 from outside the excluded devices. They randomize before they go. Every treatment gets that block picked on that cycle, and then the next time they go out the next month, they'll pick new ones to look at to hopefully get a suite over time of the whole 8 meter by 8 meter space. In addition, we want to understand what's happening outside of what we planted. So we have 3 control transects, and they take at distances moving from shore out to the lagoon. They also take quadrats. So we have a total of 171 seagrass quadrats being taken at each location, monthly and then quarterly. And they're looking at things like epiphyte cover, the number of squared. You can see in the bottom right, or bottom left, I'm sorry, is a quadrat laid over a planted area. And so they're going to count, how many of those squares have seagrass in them, an idea of how many, if you push them all together, what's their percent cover, how dense is it. They do density in 8 of the sub-squares, and then a look at canopy height. So after 1 month, I just wanted to show these to kind of give some visuals of what things are looking like out there. Peat pot unit, a little broken down. Probably they broke it on purpose when they buried it. Now whether it just didn't get fully buried or got excavated by water motion and critters. So those were looking kind of disturbed after a month. The bottom 2 pictures, we have 1 month and then at a 2 month, both all at William Manzo Park. The 2 month is on the right. 2 month is from within an enclosure. Unfortunately, I didn't have great pictures to say this was an enclosure and this was, I have a feeling that other quadrant is probably from within an enclosure as well. So it definitely increased. The site only had about 2 to 5% cover when we started. So there's a fair bit of seagrass in those pictures, at least in some of the plots. So finally, this is just to give an idea of where we're going with all this. I really don't want to present data at this stage. It's really early.
Man,
I
tempt
know.
us with
I'll come
all
back.
that great methodology.
But the idea here is that we are trying to get into all this methodology. So just so that I didn't leave you hanging, a little bit of data. We have our mean percent occurrence and mean canopy height. These are just 2 of the parameters that we're looking at. The red bars are with the cage in place. The green is with a fence. And anything blue means that the seagrass that's being monitored had no exclusion device around it. And this is all from William J. Manzo Park. The ones on the left are the first month, which is basically our baseline, and the ones on the right are after an additional month, so 2 months post-planting. You can kind of see our little cartoons in the bottom to help us remember the different treatment types. So you have the first 5 bars are our 5 treatments, and then the 3 wider bars are those control areas. I think the biggest take home that I was excited about when I do a quick look at this data is probably in the canopy height. It's really interesting that after 1 month, there's such a distinct difference between those red and blue bars. And even after 2 months, that's still they're coming together, but they're kind of holding that way. Percent occurrence is a little complicated because there was some, and also we planted, like treatment 5 and 4 are gonna have a different percent occurrence because of how we planted them. But in general, you still kind of start to see little bits of trends and changes, and we'll be doing a lot of statistics on this and adding all of that environmental data. Just haven't had the ability to dig into all of it yet. And we have the third report is coming any day now, and the 4th event will be happening either next week or the week after. So they're cruising along. Manzo Park is holding out, it seems like. Hog Point, we've had a lot of turbidity and sedimentation issues, and then we had 3 hurricanes. So that has also heavily complicated our cages, but we've had a lot to learn. Like, yes, the cages do have some hurricane-related issues, and so we're learning one way or the other about all these different pieces through the midst of this, and we'll hit it again in the spring and see what happens. So couldn't have done this without a million people, and I just wanted to throw this last slide up. We have 3 grants that funded this, one from Tourism and Development, one from Florida Department of Environmental Protection, and the Sorrel here for the oyster bar portion. And lots of people helped with design and review, and our subcontractors that did the building, and our team here that does the monitoring and sensor work. So just want to say thanks to everybody for that. And if that's it, I think that's it, if there's any questions.
Jenny, thank you. Anybody have any questions for Jenny?
I know.
So when are we going to see the final data? Because that lead
2
up.
years. 2 years to collect data.
Okay.
So it'll be a little while.
So 2 years is when the end of the grant and the entire data is presented.
June of 2026 will be 2 years post-planting. And like I said, we will continue to collect. It'll space out to that quarterly here in a few months.
Yeah.
Hopefully, Seagrass starts to senesce sort of now, I think. So we'll start to see maybe what happened after the first few months. We can work on that through the winter and then maybe provide some sort of update. And then we'll continue to watch it for another year.
Okay, yeah, I think an update would be good.
Yeah. It's going to take a lot of time to wade through.
The methodology and the partners, I mean, that is amazing.
Yeah.
So kudos to you and Virginia and the team and everybody. I'm not sure you could poke a hole through the data once it's gathered with all the different ways you guys are doing it. So kudos.
Thank you.
Virginia.
Just, to point to Kathy Hill's point is, right, do you wait till the water quality's good before you get going, or do you start learning? So it takes years to get these projects in the water and then learn from them. And so, can we do enough of them and get lucky enough with good enough conditions to learn what we need to learn so that when conditions are better, we're going to be as efficient as possible?
Yeah, no, I always think more data is better than less. So if you start collecting now, that's only going to pay dividends down the road. That's fantastic. Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you.
All right. Now we will go into a video, Seagrass Restoration Experimental Design. Good morning, Brandon.
Jenny did a great setup of what you're about to see here. So this is the video that we took at the William Manzo site, so you see kind of the processes going on with that.
Great. Roll that bean footage, Logan.
We are here today at William J. Manzo Memorial Park in Titusville to plant seagrass to better understand seagrass restoration in the Indian River Lagoon. Seagrass has been on the decline in the lagoon over the past decade or so due to excess nutrients that have entered our waters, which fuel algal blooms that shade the light that seagrasses need to survive. And so we're hoping with this project, in monitoring it over a 2-year period, to help to understand methods that might best support future restoration efforts.
This project is an experimental design that was put together by Brevard County. We Aquatech Eco Consultants are out here executing that experimental design for them. And what they're doing is they're testing out some different seagrass transplanting methods. Throughout the site, we have different planting plots in which we're employing different planting methods and then also different protections for some of those planting units. We've got 3 different planting units that we're using here. One of them is our 9-inch peat pots. So those have a specific number of shoots of our shoal grass inside of them. And then we also have a smaller version of that, which is called a seagrass plug, which has a lower shoot density, but of the same species of seagrass. And then our 3rd and final planting unit is going to be a staple unit. So those are also a very specific number of shoots that are fastened onto a staple in order to help secure that planting unit with the roots under the sediment surface and the shoots coming up out of the surface. So with the enclosures, we're trying out a couple of different methods to protect some of the planting units from herbivory. We've got one which is called the herbivory exclusion device, which is essentially a closed top cage that's going to be placed over top of the units. And then we've also got some exclusion fencing, which will rise up above the water level and provide similar protection for the planting units as well. We're also trying out some planting units that don't have any protections in place just to see how those fare.
We will be monitoring the project by deploying sensors that look at dissolved oxygen, light, the temperature, the salinity of the water, all these things that impact seagrass growth and survival so that we know how the response might be tied to our environment. And then we'll also be monitoring the grass itself to see how it's growing and spreading over the next couple of years.
We're going to be trying out this same experimental design in 2 different locations in the Indian River Lagoon. This first one's going to be happening right here in Titusville, Florida, and then the second one will be occurring in Melbourne Beach, Florida.
Seagrass is actually the base of our food chain here in the Indian River Lagoon. It is our primary producer. It's one of our key foundation species. So without the seagrass, things like manatees, turtles don't have the food that they need to grow and thrive here in the Indian River Lagoon. Seagrass is also a nursery ground for many of our important recreational and sport fisheries. It's a place where a lot of different types of invertebrates and vertebrates grow and transfer back and forth to neighboring systems like oyster reefs. And when they're large meadows, can attenuate waves and they help protect our shorelines. So they serve many, many purposes when we have those nice, robust, healthy seagrasses, and they can sequester or recycle nutrients and carbon, just like the rainforest. This project is being made possible by a number of grants. One is in partnership with the Brevard County Tourism and Development Council grant program. One was through the Florida Department of Environmental Protection Resiliency grants, and then we have match coming from the Save Our Indian River Lagoon program.
In the last decade, we've seen a decline in seagrass in the lagoon, mainly from algae blooms that block the sunlight that they need to survive. It's important to reduce the excess nutrients that are feeding the algae, and we can do this by tackling the sources of that pollution. Things like reducing the contributions to stormwater by doing simple things like keeping our grass clippings off of our driveways and roadways, by reducing or eliminating the use of fertilizer, picking up our pet waste, or making sure we maintain our cars properly so they're not leaking oil and other fluids onto the roadways that wash down into our lagoon.
Seagrass growing up, I see that. All right. Anyone have any questions for Brandon about the video? Laura Lee, please.
In the drone shots, it looked like there was patches of subaquatic vegetation already there. Was that seagrass? And then on a couple of the drone shots on the offshore side, it looked like there was dense cover. Is that Caulerpa?
There is about a 2 to 5% cover of seagrass at that location. When we checked it the first year, getting ready for our permitting, there was like 30 small patches. By the time we planted the next season, it was continuous cover at about 2 to 5%. So some of that natural recovery was happening at that location, but it's still pretty low in sparse density. Offshore, my guess would be Caulerpa as it got deeper, but that is a really long shelf. So you have quite a bit of space, and I don't think I've ever personally gotten into the deep water right at that spot. But it is pretty common when we get out into the deeper water for that. If it's darker and deeper, it's probably clerva.
Okay, thank you.
And the fact you could see it, I mean, I loved seeing the bottom of the lagoon in those drone shots. Reminds me of when I was growing up. You could see the sand. All right, great. Any other questions? Okay, we need to keep that Seagrass logo. I like that one too. Let's keep
Yeah,
that.
that was recently added in, and we're doing that at the end of all our videos.
I like that. All right. Brandon, thank you very much. Okay, so with no old business, we will move into the meat and potatoes. The new business, Brevard County Utilities Septic-to-sewer contingency requests for Sykes Creek Zones M, N, and/or T. Anthony, good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Good morning.
All right, so some good news. We made progress. We have gone to bid on 3 projects: the Sykes Creek Zones M, N, and T sewer projects. So these are original projects of the plan. So we started down this path with the original plan, and then started engineering back in 2018. These are some difficult sites to bring sewer in. We're looking at tight right-of-ways, coquina that's close to the surface, high water tables. So it's been a challenge for the engineers, but they got us to the finish line. So I wanted to start off looking at our construction bids. So one of the things that we've been seeing over the years is the construction costs growing. At a certain point in the last few years, it was difficult to plan around bidding because we couldn't predict what kind of bids we're going to get. If we can get bids, they are potentially many millions over. In this slide, we can see the engineer's estimate at 100% design was actually in line with the construction bids that we got. So Sykes Creek Zone N was, the bid actually came in less than what the engineers estimated, but T&M were just a few percent over the engineer's estimate. So the first project we're going to look at is Sykes Creek Zone N, which is 91 lots on North Banana River Drive. We have SORL funding of $4.98 million. We've also secured $7.2 million in grants. So we have partnerships with DEP and DOT to help fund this project. So we have a total budget of $12.2 million. We've spent $432,000 on engineering and other miscellaneous expenses needed to get us to this point. Our construction bid came in at $11.45 million. We're expecting construction services to be around $458,000. This still has to be negotiated and worked out on, what the county has staff to do the inspections and what will need to be contracted out. So at this moment, we're looking at $12.34 million in total expenses overall. Our budget shortfall on this is $125,000. So to be able to contract this project out, we will need some contingency because at this moment, we would not be able to come under contract to do construction. So should we talk about that here? Yeah, so we're looking like a 3% contingency would get us through to contracting this construction. Sykes Creek Zone T, this is in Horty Point in Merritt Island. So it's the end of the Newfound Harbor Drive section. Anyone who's familiar with the Girl Scouts camp there, it's from that area south. We have 148 lots. We have $6 million in SORL funding. We've secured another $8 million in grant funding. That's a mix of ARPA and DEP funding. So our total budget is 14.1 million. Spent $651,000 on engineering and land. So we did have to buy some land for this project. And then our construction bid came in at 13.2 million. We're looking at $528,000 in potential construction services needed.
Just construction oversight, make sure the contractor's doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Yep, and engineers double checking that the material that we're paying for went in the ground and it was done correctly. So the total expenses, we're looking at 14.39 million. Leaves us with a budget shortfall of $273,000. So with this project, we believe the 5% contingency of 301,000 would get us through contracting that construction so we can move forward. With Sykes Creek Zone M, we have 56 lots on Milford Point. So this is a narrow peninsula on Merritt Island, east of Banana River Drive, north of 520. We have 3.2 million in soil funding. We've secured 1.9 million in grant funding so far. So our total budget is 5.1 million. On engineering and land, we spent 867,000. Land was far more expensive in this project area, so it helped drive that cost. Our construction bid was 8.2 million, and our expected construction services would be around $328,000. So our total expenses, we're looking at 9.4 million. Leaves us with a budget shortfall of 4.25 million. So we were running the numbers on this, looking for possibilities. There are two options we see. One is we do have excess budget in another project that has moved forward and not needed all the funding. So we have in South Beaches Zone A, 2.24 million left in that budget that will not be utilized. Our remaining shortfall, if that were to be transferred, would be 2 million. We also have a pending grant request for this project. So we applied for 3.86 million in grants at the latest round of DEP funding. We have not heard back from DEP on their prioritization for these grants, but we expect between this month and December to hear some back from them.
That's the 100 million Indian River Lagoon grants program.
So the request is really to talk about how we can move forward. So with Sykes Creek Zone N, we believe a 3% contingency request would allow us to contract this construction and start bringing sewer to this neighborhood. With Sykes Creek Zone T, we believe a 5% contingency would allow us to bring construction here. With Sykes Creek Zone M, we would need some funding substitution and potentially more to get the construction. So.
Unless the grant comes in.
Unless the grant comes in.
Okay. All right, questions? Yes, Lorraine.
I was going to ask Anthony, do those numbers include the house hookups, the laterals?
No, this is just construction. Sykes Creek Zone T and M both have dedicated grants for house connections. So we were able to secure funding from DEP back in 2019 to go towards those homeowners. Sykes Creek Zone N has a portion of the DEP grant that is for the homeowner connections, but it's not a very large budget. But there's some financial assistance for the homeowners in the budget, but it's not reflected in these numbers.
Of course, the county does have the mandatory connections once the sewer is there.
Correct.
And I guess, will you continue to pursue more grant money for the house connections then?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, Stephanie's got a question?
So we normally have contingency funds set aside, but what you're saying is we would need additional contingency funds in those amounts for these projects to move forward.
So for the projects in the plan right now, we have 5% set aside for each project. So N&T would be pulling from the money that was set
Okay.
aside.
So that was my question. So we don't need additional money for those? Okay.
Well, N is below the $200,000 threshold that requires a COC recommendation.
But T is not.
But T is not, and
Okay.
it's all bid together for economies of scale, and so any changes with T and M would have to come through the COC and the board, so we're just, transparency, giving it all to you.
But we could separate that if we,
The way the bid was structured was N and T as the base bid and M as a bid alternate. So I don't believe we can separate N and T, but we can award just N and T and not M.
that was my question. And so even though together, because they are lumped together, the contingency, how can I phrase this? If you put them together, they're less than 200 for two, if that makes sense. So, but do we still need to make a recommendation because the 300 is over? Okay, all right. So can I do that?
If we could, I'd like to, any other questions to Anthony, and then we'll go ahead and look for a motion and a second for discussion. Are there any other questions for Anthony? Todd?
So what is the homeowner's requirement is their on-site stuff, so the demolition of their septic and,
Yeah,
so they don't have any contribution toward the construction activities?
No, there will be no assessments to the homeowners. So it'll be, they'll have tap outs to their property line. The funds that are available for connections would be distributed equally amongst all the homeowners, and we would come under contract with each individual homeowner so that they are aware of how much grant funding is available to each of them. They would be their own project manager for their property and then request reimbursement.
But we do have the pre-approved plumbers.
We do. For those that cannot front the cash, we have pre-approved plumbers that we could pay directly. So they have to choose one of those 7.
Okay, and is there any utility contribution to this, or it's solely Sorrells grants and things?
There was a portion, so we are not funding the lift station that was part of it. There was already some work needed, so they basically tied these two projects, that project with this one to cover it. So.
Okay, any other?
And, yeah, last question. I know we're way down the road on these, and I'm not necessarily proposing that we change direction now, but given the price escalation of these, I calculate these are running $100,000 to $140,000 per house. I know we've had numerous discussions on other collection alternatives, and I would strongly, strongly push that we make sure that we're looking at those for other projects, because at the end of the day, this only makes sense because of the state grant funding that is being captured here, but that is still the public's money.
Yeah.
And $100,000 to $140,000, there are other ways that are more cost-effective if the utility is willing to be creative, if we're willing to be creative, if we're willing to look at other alternatives. So $100,000 to $140,000 is a challenging lift.
Yes. We, the larger story is the original engineering went the route of gravity. So, I mean, that was the best. With the coquina and elevations, we found that it was far exceeding, like we were getting these cost estimates 4 years ago on this. it was not looking good. So they started looking at a mix of force main or vacuum. So for Sixth Street Zone M, the only other opportunity would be force main, because gravity would just, it's infeasible to bring gravity down there. Yep.
And so is that all, is that gravity, or is it all?
This is all vacuum. That
Okay,
was the
all
route that utilities went.
Okay. Any other questions for Anthony? Oh, Lorraine, please.
Yeah, do any of these provide, by providing sewer out here, do they provide opportunities to other homes further in by drawing the line?
So Sykes Creek Zone in will have a stub out for another street. So we were not able to tie that in late in the engineering because we already knew we didn't really have the budget. But we're, for future expansion, we'd be able to tie in another street. T and M are both dead ends, so there would be, there's no one else around to tie them in. These are kind of the ones who have been left out.
And so, I mean, that's one of the things one would need to look at, is what future opportunities and investment would make available. And I'm not clear what the alternatives are, the good alternatives. If you're just thinking advanced septic?
That could be one of them, but I still am a firm believer that in these hard-to-serve areas, that the low-pressure individual pump stations are much more economical. I know they have their series of challenges. I certainly acknowledge that, but they are, from a capital standpoint, and I don't like them. You know, I'll acknowledge that too. I understand why the utilities wouldn't like them. But when we're in tough situations with the dollars that we're talking now, there just may be some things that we don't like, that we need to do, that is in the best interest of stretching our dollars.
And is that, you said it's a low-pressure system?
It's
I'm
called low
familiar.
pressure. It's, you know, there's a lot of counties, Port St. Lucie has significant numbers, Vero does. They're basically an individual small pump station at each home. And they use a small diameter pipe that's a force main, but it only has to be buried, 3 feet deep. You don't have all the dewatering costs, you don't have all of the additional depth of cuts, because even with the vacuum system, you're still going somewhat deeper than those force mains, and the vacuum pump stations are very, very expensive. And the vacuum pump stations are great, and if you could do one vacuum pump station for 600 houses and spread it across that, it's fine. But in a small situation where you got 50 homes, you got this really expensive vacuum pump station spread across a small number of homes, and the cost per unit skyrockets. And so but that being said, it's a challenge for utilities to operate. There are downsides of these other systems. A lot of utilities, and I'm sure Brevard is not set up to take ownership and operation of those. That's its own challenge. If you have those and it's the homeowner's responsibility, things like storms that we just had are challenging. But, when costs often are going to be more in the neighborhood of $40,000, $50,000, and we're now talking $100,000 to $150,000, it puts us in a place where, some of the premium for a more ideal solutions, I just think we have to question it, because, that's, if you cut that price in, so we're talking, how many millions of dollars? 2
million.
No, it's more than 2 million.
It's
more than 2 million, because even though we've already budgeted it, we're spending state dollars, we're spending Sorrel dollars, we're spending all of these things. So the total of these projects
It's 33.
is 33 million. So if you could cut that in half, then that's $17 million to go other places to benefit the Lagoon. That's where I come from, is.
And you're saying the low-pressure systems would cut that in half?
I don't know, but I don't know if they would or not, but it's.
I think that's.
So let's finish our questions to Anthony.
And again, I'm bringing this up we have gone way down this road, we've designed it, we have these projects that are going to go in, we've captured state dollars, that that if we do a massive redirect, we would probably lose. And so, and I don't want to, I'm absolutely not proposing we jeopardize the dollar, so my comments are really more on how we work programmatically and given this as an example. So maybe this wasn't the right time to bring that up, but I do feel strongly about it, that it's something that we have to consider, because I would not want to see us make a change, have to redesign, have to restart the project, lose out on the state dollars, and the state dollars are about half of the total expenditure anyway. And so if we lost those, we wouldn't have gained anything for us locally if we jeopardized the project. So I absolutely do not support jeopardizing the project, but this data is such to say that we got to, this is what we're dealing with today, and it's not going to change. The environmental conditions you're dealing with, the construction conditions you're dealing with, even if the construction market's starting to flatten out, but it's not going to pull back. The numbers you're dealing with are some of what you're going to continue to see. Grant dollars are going to go away. They're already starting to. They're going to start fading over the next couple of years. And so this program, if this program continues on, if it gets renewed and refreshed, and you've still got projects making choices on, I won't be around. But I highly recommend that you take a look at that, because to stretch those dollars as far as you can. Because if I had $13 million in my pocket to go do another big project, it'd be worth some sacrifice on how we operate for the anomalies.
So real quick, Virginia, do you have something?
Well, I just wanted to add, when we went through the initial decision about gravity, vacuum, or low pressure, right, the rule of thumb at that time was that a vacuum system could be cost competitive if you had about 80 or more homes. And so, one of these is 91 homes, one of these is 148 homes, and then this problem child is 56. So we knew we were pushing our luck with that one, but the other ones, it should have been a cost competitive thing, and we hoped that by combining them all in economies of scale, it would be better than what we have.
And so
But we take your point, and we've started those conversations.
And with force main, utilities has worked out what they need to move forward with force main, so many of the new projects are going to be force main. Yeah.
And so my questions, I just had two. The first one was, the grant numbers for N and T were, or I'm sorry, for N and T were amazing. They were over 0.5%, over half of the cost. But M, obviously, the lower number, was there a reason that the grant numbers for that were less?
They're, in the same way we do a cost benefit analysis, the state, I believe, does the same thing. And so, because it's a smaller, more expensive project, the cost benefit just doesn't shine as brightly. With T and N, we also got grant funding from outside DEP, so that adds to it. So DOT is partnering with N for some nutrient credits, and then with T, we were able to get ARPA assigned to it.
Cool. And then, so I know, Anthony, you and I talked, you applied for Virginia, we applied for the DEP grant as part of the 100 million for the lagoon. When will we know whether or not we get that?
It's usually this time of year, October, November.
Okay.
But there's not, we will announce on this date.
There's no deadline,
so,
yeah. And then, just how much in total did we apply for at the DEP, at that grant? Do we know, around?
Like a progress report?
For that 100 million, how many projects in total?
She's going to look.
I guess I'm just trying to think, like, again, if we're going to, I'm trying to look at the chances that we're going to get that. And if we've applied for 80 million of the 100, kudos, great, that's awesome, I'm glad we did. But if we applied for, $78 million that are way more cost effective than this project, and the chances of us getting this project may not. And Terry, if you don't have a number,
I don't
that's
have the-
okay.
I don't have
the dollar amount.
Okay. And then my last question.
No,
Okay.
I wouldn't, and I've got one other concern that's actually gonna be opposite on that. I think you're cutting it really tight on the 3% and 5% contingency, because you've only got 30 grand left. And so I think there's a good chance you're gonna be coming back and asking us for more money at a later date, because you run into one unexpected condition and you can't do anything for 30 grand. So you have absolutely zero construction contingency, and I know I generally don't like to go into a construction project with a less than about 3 to 5% for infield conditions. So I think you're running tight on your ask on N&T, and not leaving yourself any room for unforeseen conditions in the field. So if we approve this as requested, I think this committee should be fully prepared to have to deal with another request at a later date, because I don't think you've got adequate construction contingency.
Stephanie, did you have something? You were going ready for a motion?
Go. Well, I just wanted to clarify, the residents will still be issued an income for those that do have the lateral provided. We still have, this is the way it works, right? People are issued a tax statement with the
No.
benefit they receive that they do have to pay taxes on?
No longer. So we were able to get a determination through the USDA that this is for the benefit of public good.
Okay.
So the grant assistance to the homeowners is not taxed.
Great.
Okay. Stephanie, please.
Okay, I'm hoping this is an acceptable motion. So what I would like to propose is that we separate the Zone N and Zone T from Zone M. Can we do that?
Yes.
And go ahead and approve the contingency funding requests for Zone N and Zone T. And hopefully, we get the grant for Zone M. But this would allow us to proceed with those two that we currently have funding for.
Okay, so there's a motion. Is there a second?
Could you get clarification on M or N? I couldn't quite understand which one.
N and T,
Nancy and Tom.
Okay.
and separate out M.
Mary. No Mary, yes to Nancy and Todd. Is there a second? Okay.
I have a question in order. Is your contract and bid structured in a way that you believe that you can contract with N&T only without M?
Yes, M was bid as a alternate.
Okay.
Yeah.
We also can and plan to negotiate, try to get the price down, and the construction oversight costs, those have not been contracted yet either, so there's room to negotiate there. So, to your point of there's no wiggle room here,
So you feel like you can generate some contingency?
we hope we
Okay,
can.
I'll
yeah.
second it then.
Okay, so there's a motion and a second. So, discussion? Yes, Kurt.
The only concern I have is if we don't go forward with M now, are we jeopardizing that in any way? Because I look at the
Can you
big
go
picture,
back
we
to
know
M?
we know we have funding continuing for another 2 years. But the bad part about that is we don't know if we're going to have funding beyond those 2 years. But the idea is to get it all done. And I'm pretty confident that it will pass, but there are no obvious guarantees. But Mother Mary isn't going to get cheaper either. So if there's some way that we find that we can do this, I think we really have to do it. So that's my thought. I don't know what the rest of you think, but I think that we should go forward with the 3. If we go forward with the 3 and we find that there's a real problem with the financing, or can we opt out of it or postpone it?
So, first, this is a recommendation to the county commission. The county commission will have to decide whether to proceed or not. There's the $1.943 million in grants that we currently have for M that could be jeopardized if we don't proceed. And to your point, we don't know what the grant future is going to look like going forward, right? We might not be able to recover those funds. The bid that we have is good for 90 days, so we can't wait. We don't know when we'll hear from DEP on the 3.9 million request. But we don't have long to wait, and this has got to go to the county commission, and then it's got to get contracted. So that's why we sent the incomplete agenda, just letting you know that we were going to have this discussion today, not knowing what the bids were going to be, and then are providing you the numbers, on the spot today, which I'm sorry you didn't have more notice, that the bid opening should have been a week earlier, but Milton caused a delay.
So if we went forward with the whole three, and you get a year down the road, by doing that, we've captured as much as we can right now of the grant monies, and we're not at risk of losing any of that. In 6 months, 10 months down the road, you realize you're not going to be able to do M. Can we put that on the shelf at that time? Are we committed to continuing even though we don't have the funding?
If we contract it, there would be penalty clauses.
Okay.
Definitely, because, sometimes on procurement, you can enter into a contract, but with a delayed notice to proceed, and if you don't get started, your cancellations may be pretty minor, so any chance
So that's something we could try to negotiate.
putting them in the contract award, and I know we would have to release the contingency just so that you have that to just enter into contract, but from a strategic standpoint, do a delayed notice to proceed with, and then understand what your cancellation provisions are, because you may be able to push out that delayed notice or have your, if you're getting into upfront things like just shop drawings and all of those are pretty low cost, so pretty low risk compared to this, that you could potentially get down the road a ways and understand what's happening with DEP and then make a more educated decision a couple months down the road without fully jeopardizing your bid right now.
Well, with that in mind, I would suggest that we go with all three.
So are you suggesting we amend the motion? Is that your?
Yes, sir.
Stephanie?
Do we have the extra 3 million?
We have 27 million in contingency.
So we do have the extra 3 million.
Two, yes. You're talking about the 2 plus the 150 plus the 300? Yes.
I mean, the county commission's going to have to decide ultimately anyway, so we can go for the whole thing and see what they do.
Okay, so that sounds like you're accepting the amendment. Todd, you second it. Do you accept the change?
I don't know if I can add a caveat. It's just yes, I would accept it with the caveat of this additional work to try to minimize it, and through that process confirming that you don't have some other options that would avoid, if revisiting this would allow you to save. You might lose 2 million, but if you save 4, I don't care if you lose 2. So I would accept it with those contingencies of that, those efforts on working through to get that grant funding and ensuring that you don't have another pivot point, but to preserve your bid.
It works for me.
Okay.
Can I clarify, does the motion include, excuse me, moving the 2.24 from the what's left in South Central A? South Beaches A?
Yes.
Okay.
And Todd, yes?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so there is a motion and a second to go ahead and approve all three with Todd's recommendations on the procurement side to look at the cancellations to try to minimize that. That's the motion and the second on the floor. Is there further discussion on that? Okay. Well, I'll just add, I agree with it. I think looking forward on this whole entire project has been the way that we've positioned ourselves all along, and I think continuing that posture is what's going to help us continue to help the lagoon. So I'm in favor of it as well. So with no further committee discussion, Stephanie, did you have something? Okay, with no further committee discussion, we'll go ahead and look for public comment. Is there any public comment on the motion and the second?
Should I do
Please.
more of a, can I just do it from here?
No, you've got to come up here, sir. Steve, please.
It's actually more of a question than a comment. First of all, I want to thank Todd for checking me on the decimal point, because I was afraid maybe I was off. I actually calculated that's like 167,000 per household on one of those. I guess the question is why not advanced septic? That's like 1/8 to 1/10 of the cost. Now, maybe there's something going on here with, well, we can get this money from the state for building new sewer systems, and I get that. But if you looked at this sort of collectively or holistically, if you had this big pot of money, is this the way you would spend it to help the lagoon? Like, as opposed to, we got, another $20 million there, something like that. Maybe we should be looking at more dredging. Let's do advanced septic. So that's really the question. Maybe why not advanced septic?
Thank you for your comment. Anybody on the committee have further discussion?
I mean, I can just add my view of why I'm supporting this at this point is in a lot of site conditions, I definitely would agree with that concept of advanced septic. My suspicion is that you're not going to do advanced septic in this with the site conditions that have been described for, that
Anthony,
that
will you bring
amount.
up the picture?
Because if you've got that coquina and those digging issues and real shallow water tables, then we're going to run into some of the same challenges with that in these particular areas. And the other piece is because we've got so much infusion of dollars that are non-local dollars, that those, if you pivot the project, are likely to go away. And if those go away, now we don't have the 20 million to put to work here. And so when you look at our dollars that we're spending locally, in this case, I don't know that they're going to be substantively changed. And with that, we're going to end up with the centralized sewer system that's been the focus of trying to have that where possible. And so it's a situation that's challenging, and it's less than ideal, but I do support that with where we're at today and all of the different things, that it's probably the right thing to move forward.
Okay. Yeah, Stephanie and then Lorraine.
The other part of that is that this is a more permanent solution. You put in advanced septic, it has to be redone somewhere down the line. And it has to be maintained properly by the people who have it. And granted, it's more expensive, but all the things that you said, Todd, are true as well. And I think this gives us a more permanent solution that we aren't having to readdress 10, 15, 20 years down the road.
Lorraine, did you have something?
Yeah, just to add to that, we have an area where these look like, I don't know, what are they, quarter-acre lots? They're
Some of them are
small
very-
lots.
Yeah, they're
You
tiny.
start to concentrate a lot of septics, even advanced septics. And, you're looking at a high concentration there. So, as well as limitations to how those properties can be developed. And again, the coquina issues and the water tables, so.
Well, they have septic now, they have septic drain fields now, so you kind of have to assume that drain fields can still work there, right?
Well, but
Well, they're not
that
working.
would assume that
That's
they're
the
working
problem.
now.
That's why the lagoon is in the situation it is.
Yes, so go ahead, Commissioner Smith.
Who's going to be presenting, if we approve this, now it's going to go to the county commission. Who's going to present this to the commissioners?
Are you volunteering?
So that they have some kind of, I don't know that I'm knowledgeable enough. I'm no Todd or Virginia. I'm pretty persuasive, but that's my question.
So per the bylaws, my role is to take your recommendations to the county commission. Obviously, the utilities director is heavily involved, so I would guess that he'll be in the box as well. And we'll have Anthony and their
I would be
engineer.
willing to be with the two of you when you meet with the commissioners.
That would be great. Thank you.
Don, did you have?
Yeah, many of these areas were flooded during Milton, you know, in the past storms, so they're very critical to get some other alternative than septic tanks.
Yeah, I think advanced septic is great where it works. I think, as in the picture, these lots and their sizes right there along the lagoon with that water table, and the construction
coquina.
limitations and the coquina.
So the site conditions, in addition to making it difficult, mean that a properly installed advanced septic is still not going to perform as well as a system in, nice, deep, sandy soils, right? Advanced septic does nothing for the phosphorus load, and it only reduces the nitrogen load by half. So,
And I would suggest when we meet with these commissioners that we have that picture, because that picture's worth 1,000 words.
And again, the one thing which I was pointing out about the secured grant funding, we've got, just with N and T, we've got 15 million. The cost of that is only 10 million. So we're already getting $5 million more than a match, as far as grant funding for the entire project. Okay. Any other further public comment? Nope. Okay, we'll go ahead and close public comment. Any other committee discussion? All right. So we will go ahead and vote on the motion on the floor. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, passes unanimously. Great discussion, everybody. Thank you. All right. And so with that, we will go down to general public comments. I have one general public comment. I think it's you, Steve?
Was that my part? No,
Yeah.
that was my question.
Oh, okay. All right, great. Okay, so we'll go ahead and close public comment. It'll be right now, final comments by chair and committee members. Does anybody have any exciting Halloween plans, costumes, anything?
I have one comment.
Please,
Not a
Todd.
costume.
Oh. You sure, Todd? Lorraine?
I was just going to ask that, given what came up and given there are other projects, still in the pipeline, that we explored the alternatives more in upcoming meetings. We could
You mean like
prioritize those.
For presentations?
Yeah, because, I'm not that familiar with the, how those other systems work that Todd suggested, where they're appropriate.
Well, and I heard Virginia say that that's already occurring with their staff, that they're, again, made, every decision's wrong at some point in time, so you make it with the best information you had, and I trust that the staff did that when they made this decision and went down this path, and you just have to revisit it when conditions change, and we're certainly in changing conditions, and that's what I heard, so.
Yeah, when you look at the change in cost between the 75%
Yeah.
engineering estimate and the 100%, it's the economy that really.
So I think, I agree. I do think we've got to really take a look. I don't know that it's a holistic plan change. These are individual design decisions you're making on each project. So it's, when you get into these projects, these septic-to-sewer projects, I think that definitely needs to be part of the conversation. The only other piece that I wanted to add, which was the nature of my comment, was I understand that both from a a community standpoint, the county commission standpoint, there's a desire to, really to do these. We've got no homeowner contributions on these. These are not inexpensive homes. They are high-value homes. People have, I got to maintain my roof. I've got to maintain my other site conditions. These septics are not, spring chickens. They've got some age to them. Once again, to maximizing how far our public dollars go, I personally do still feel like there needs to be some contribution of the property as well. I do fully appreciate and support that there's an awful lot of people, I guarantee if you go to that street, there's a bunch of people that have lived there 10 and 20 and 30 and 40 years and probably don't have the dollars to pay for it, and I get that. But I can tell you that I've done a lot of creative solutions with maybe where the county fronts the money and then recovers it as a long-term assessment over 10 to 20 years or something of that nature that doesn't force them to refinance their homes and is considerate. But the reality is they've got maintenance dollars that were going to come at some point. And so having that as part of our funding source for me is a really important piece to ensuring that both our grant dollars and our SORL dollars go as far as they can to benefiting the lagoon. And so that piece of, as a property owner, I've got some obligations on this, I think is something that, for me, needs to be part of the conversation. Again, remain considerate of them. Know that you got people that aren't going to have the cash, but there are tools that can be used to still help get there and stretch those public dollars.
Yes, Commissioner Smith.
I share your thoughts, but I can tell you, having dealt with the public as a commissioner for 8 years,
Yep.
At what point do you decide that the public has to start paying? That's one. Two, just as an example, in Virginia, you can refresh my memory because it's foggy at best, but when we the commission decided that we were going to do smoke tests in Satellite Beach, we were firm in the thought that we had to pay for it because we wanted it done. But it was voluntary for the people in Satellite Beach to ask for it. I bet we got, less than 3% of the people that were willing to chip in to just let us do it. I mean,
It was the repairs. Once we found the leak, we told them, you have a leak, it's a violation.
Right.
We have a grant program to pay for the repairs. And very small percentage of people actually made the repairs.
right, so that's what stimulated the discussion amongst the commission, that if we're going to do this, we have to pay for it. Because if we leave it up to the people, even when it was free, they weren't doing it. They don't have our passion to clean up that lagoon. We know that. A lot of people do.
So the board passed a mandatory repair
Right,
rule
so we
with
passed it
fines
so
and-
that they had to do it. No ifs, ands, or buts. So that's my,
And I think that's the key, is that those abilities to mandate those repairs, even on private property, are present. It's no different than any other code enforcement type activity.
Right.
All of those laws are present. They have actually, even, our Senator Mayfield has been here multiple times, and, her Clean Waterways Act required utilities to significantly enhance their assessment of inflows and infiltration and problems that were on private property. And I know for elected officials, this is a really hard conversation, because it is. It's a drastic change, and it hits, and people aren't necessarily positioned to deal with it, but it is one of those things that the regulations are there, they're continuing to strengthen, and they do have those provisions for how to mandate that, how to address that interface between private activities and their impact on public systems.
well, there is that, yes.
And I think Lorraine was asking that maybe we get a presentation
Yeah.
to the committee about maybe some of the different, and maybe it's a great time to do a refresher from utilities about their lines, the vacuum systems, pump systems, just so that we are a little bit more educated, and interfaced with utilities.
Well, and also, what the conditions are.
Right.
That, really make that, so we can be more informed in these decisions. But I just wanted to, can I just say one thing in regard to what?
Yeah.
The discussion with Mr. Smith and Mr. Swingle, I think it's a good point, because I understand both points, and I understand we're going to slow things up with the public officials who are also not as passionate as we are on the Indian River Lagoon. Unfortunately, there's a lot of education to be done there too. And so there's going to be time, we're adding time whenever there are expenses that will be put on to taxpayers who in turn are voting for those public officials, quite honestly. That's certainly what we've experienced.
Barbara, you have something? Barbara? Oh, it was on. Turn it. Yeah, you're
Okay.
good.
I just want to say something about private property rights and people when it comes to changing their property. And as long as they're educated, which I think most of the people in this development would understand, that their property is going to be valued much higher after they're connected to a sewer. And we can probably prove this in the market with resales. And anyone buying a lot today would ask, do I have to put in a septic tank or is it connected to sewer? And you and I both know it's going to be more valued if you're connected to sewer. So should the property owner totally benefit and not have to contribute? There's always some type of small assessment that can be done that would not hurt very much, okay? Yes, there'll be objections, but there are small assessments like solid waste fees that could be increased. Just want to comment on that as far as the property owner does benefit quite a bit. And there should be some affordable contribution.
Okay.
Well, and I'll remind you that is, I agree with that, except that in the real world, we're not dealing with a lot of people that, one, as I pointed out, they're not as impassioned with improving the lagoon, one. And two, there's just people that are obstinate. And one case that comes to mind immediately is that the mid-reach, putting in the sand. We have 3 property owners, and if you live on the ocean, wouldn't you want more sand in front of your house? That's kind of a no-brainer. But we have 3 property owners that want to sue the county because they don't want that sand. And when I was on the commission, I said, well, that's easy enough. We just won't put sand in front of their houses. Well, DEP said, it's all or nothing. So that's my point. I agree with you 100%, but when you're dealing with the public, you just don't know what you're getting into. And, well, he didn't have to, well, then why should I? And so we just wanted to take all that off the table and just pay for it. That way, everybody gets it, and we all share in the cost, and we've got the money coming in. We've decided to tax ourselves to do it. So the money's there, so let's just get it done.
Yeah. All right. Great discussion, and we still are 15 minutes short of our 3-hour limit, so look at that. Go team. All right, everybody, thank you so much. We'll see everybody in November. Meeting adjourned.
The opinions expressed by any member of the public during any period of public comment do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Board of County Commissioners of Brevard County, Florida, Space Coast Government Television, or the program sponsor, and are solely those of the presenter. The Board of County Commissioners of Brevard County, Florida, Space Coast Government Television, and the program sponsor hereby expressly disclaim any and all responsibility or liability for any defamatory or slanderous statements expressed by any member of the public during any such period.